Chapter 111. Inside a dark room. Soren carefully took out the heavy stone. Vivian had been following Gloria all this time, and the Northern Witch had to teach her knowledge at night. Maybe she felt something, but the little girl was obviously working harder than before. She had almost finished reading all the books that Gloria brought with her. At this rate, she would soon become a qualified wizard. Soren also thought that it was good for the little girl to learn more. After all, it was not easy to find a senior witch to teach her. He held the heavy stone in his palm and tried to identify it at the same time. Soon, a row of data appeared: item type, elemental crystal stone, earth, item grade, grade 1 legendary item, item description, a special treasure from the earth elemental plane. It was formed by the spiritual energy of the earth. It was endowed with special magic. When activated, it can cast powerful spells. It doesn't seem to be a single item. From the patterns on the edge, it can be seen that it was once part of something. Requirements: none. Special effects: summon earth elemental, 7 days once, stone skin, 3 days once. Grade 1 legendary equipment. Soren's mouth revealed a smile. After such a long time, he finally got his first legendary equipment. In this world, equipment that could increase attributes was very rare. Most of the equipment could produce additional effects or cast certain spells. For example, the wizard's staff. Most of the staff could not increase the power of their spells. The most common effect was that it could store spells. Gloria had a staff that stored spells in her multidimensional bag. The staff could be used more often than the spell scroll, but it could not store more advanced spells. There was a relatively simple rule to determine whether an item was a legendary item or not. That was, legendary items could automatically restore the number of spells they could cast, and the requirements to use them were lower. The staff could not be activated without the corresponding ability. However, many legendary items could still activate their power even if they did not have the ability to cast spells. Soren also had a deadwood staff in his multidimensional bag. It was a weapon similar to a staff, and it was enchanted with a specific number of spells. However, legendary equipment did not have such a number of times. As long as it was a legendary item, many of them could automatically recover over time. Summon earth elemental. Soren gently stroked the smooth stone and murmured, "This seems to be a 6th circle spell. Although it can only be used once every 7 days, it should be enough to deal with many situations." Earth elementals had a monster level of around 15. Summoning an earth elemental to help him would have a huge effect. Just by looking at how Soren had been slashing at the iron golems for a long time, one could tell how strong they were as meat shields. They could even fight against the iron golems for a long time. The second spell he could use was the Stoneskin spell, which was one of the most important defensive spells for wizards. If a mage's armor could block 1 or 2 attacks, then Stoneskin would allow a wizard to stand in the middle of a crowd and let them attack him. A mage's armor could only provide a few dozen points of defense, and an advanced mage's armor could only provide 100 or so points of defense. However, Stoneskin could withstand more than 150 points of physical damage. According to Soren's current attack power of 30 points per slash, he would need at least 4 or 5 slashes to break through the protective energy of Stoneskin. However, Stoneskin also had a drawback. After casting Stoneskin, one's dexterity would decrease by around 2 points. Since it was not an energy field like a mage's armor, Stoneskin would also be broken after receiving high damage, but it could greatly reduce the damage received. Summon Earth Elemental, 6th circle spell. After casting the spell, a portal will be opened to the Earth Elemental plane. Summon an Earth Elemental with 12 basic HP, 10% chance to summon an advanced Earth Elemental with 16 basic HP, 5% chance to summon an elite Earth Elemental with 20 basic HP, and 1% chance to summon an Earth Elemental Lord or Earth Elemental Elder. After casting the spell, the Earth Elemental has a 10% chance to attack the caster. The caster must complete a will test to control the Earth Elemental's will. The Earth Elemental will then act according to the caster's will. The difficulty of the will test depends on the level of the Earth Elemental. The higher the level of the Earth Elemental, the more likely it is to trigger the will test. The basic HP was the minimum HP of each level. If the HP was 12, then 10 levels of creatures would have at least 120 HP. Soren's rogue class had a basic HP of 6, and the wizard class had a basic HP of 4. Therefore, if an earth elemental with a base HP of 20 was summoned, its meat shield ability could even resist the giant dragon for a period of time. But all supernatural creatures had a much higher basic HP. And this basic HP could be added with Constitution. That was to say, as long as the Constitution was higher than 10, every 2 points of Constitution would give an additional 1 point of HP. That was why supernatural creatures had such a strong vitality. They could not die even after being slashed so many times. Soren was the same. The higher the HP, the stronger the vitality. Ordinary people would start to feel dizzy after losing a little more blood, but as long as his blood loss did not exceed the critical point of death, his combat power would not be reduced too much. Vitality was not only reflected in this little bit, but also in many other aspects. For example, the reaction after being poisoned, the effect of resisting some deadly spells, and the influence of strength in a seriously injured state, etc. Stone Skin, Level 4 spell. After casting the spell, the caster will be covered by a layer of stone skin energy, absorbing any physical damage below 10 points. Each point of spell energy can increase the absorption effect by 1 point. Attacks below the absorption effect of the protective energy will not cause any damage to the caster. The caster can withstand a maximum of 200 points of attack. After casting Stone Skin, the caster's dexterity will be reduced by 2 points. Stone Skin focused more on the casting level and the spell's power. Ordinary Stone Skin could only protect against attacks below 10 points of power. If an ordinary person slashed with a sword, it would take about 20 slashes to break through the protective energy. During this time, the caster would not suffer any damage. But if it was a profession, as long as the attack power exceeded 10 points, then the damage received would be offset by the protective energy. The slash might only cut through the muscle layer. 10 points of spell energy could increase the attack power of Stone Skin to 20 points. Therefore, Stone Skin was the most troublesome spell cast by a wizard close to the legendary level. Any physical attack below 40 points would not be able to break through their protective Stone Skin. Soren needed to cast Sword Form, Heavy Slash, at least 5 times to break through the protective energy of Stone Skin. Among all the protective spells, the most useful one was still the Mage Armor, at field, because it was a protective energy field. Unfortunately, the Mage Armor could only withstand a limited amount of damage, so it could be easily broken in 1 or 2 attacks. Therefore, in high-intensity battles, wizards would prioritize casting Stone Skin on themselves. This was because it could withstand more attacks and could last for a longer period of time. Soren solemnly put away the equipment. This was the best legendary equipment he could get before the time of troubles. As long as he had it, he could even try to slay a dragon. Of course, it was not the kind of dragon he encountered today, but the more common pterosaur, earth dragon, and wyvern. If a white dragon was willing to fight with him on the ground, Soren had about a 50% chance of killing an adult white dragon. Because white dragons were the lowest level of pentashade dragons, among the pentashade dragons such as black dragons, red dragons, and green dragons, the white dragon's spellcasting ability was the weakest. They were often seen at Soren's destination, which was the range of the Frost Kingdom. At the thought of slaying a dragon, Soren seriously considered the success rate of slaying a dragon. Because there was a very powerful profession in the warlock class called Dragon Disciple. There were only 2 ways for a Dragon Disciple to advance. The first way was to awaken the dragon's blood on their own. While retaining the warlock's spellcasting ability, they would continue to gain the attribute bonus of the dragon's blood. This method of advancement had very high requirements, and most of them were produced in drakons. It was difficult for a dragon disciple to advance into a dragon disciple if the dragon's blood was too diluted. The second way was to slay a dragon. The warlock's bloodline talent was relatively special. It had a very powerful fusion and absorption ability. Even if a warlock did not have the dragon's blood, after slaying a dragon, they could transfer the dragon's ability to themselves through a special advancement ceremony. After this ceremony, the warlock could advance into a dragon disciple. Their original spellcasting ability would not be weakened, but they could gain the dragon's strength, constitution, intelligence, and charm bonus. A dragon disciple with a profession level of about 10 could get a total of about 12 points of additional attribute bonus. 24 profession levels, and the basic HP would become the same as a warrior's, 10. After entering the legendary realm, the HP would be the same as a barbarian's, 12. It could be said that they were a boss-level character who could cast spells and fight hand-to-hand. In the past, there were many warlocks who died on the path of advancing into a dragon disciple, but those who succeeded became very powerful. They liked to call themselves dragons' descendants. The growth of a dragon disciple was undoubtedly very strong, but the disadvantage was that the slaughter EXP needed for the profession level was about 3 times that of other advanced professions. They would be punished by the growth of the dragon's EXP. Dragons needed hundreds of years to grow, and their strength would also be limited by the same. Among all the spellcasters, a dragon disciple was the only one who did not need to reach the high grade, profession level 15, and did not need any transformation ceremony to have a lifespan of more than 500 years. In theory, a level 10 dragon disciple could live for 2,000 years. If Soren felt that it was possible, he wanted to try to let Vivian advance into a dragon disciple, and the sooner the better. If she really was a deity. If she continued to advance in this way, when she reached the legendary realm, it would be hard to say who would win even if she were to fight against a deity who had fallen from the mortal world. P.S. There are 2 chapters today. Everyone, please vote for me. There will be more chapters tomorrow. Chapter 112. It was getting late into the night. Soren kept the elemental stone close to his body and then checked his data display. He had accumulated more than 34,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough for him to level up several professions. However, the problem in front of him now was whether he should continue to level up as a wizard or level up as a rogue to prepare for his profession advancement. Wizards needed time to memorize spells, but they had great potential for growth. He estimated that he wouldn't have much time to memorize spells in the next half a month. Rogues could directly advance after leveling up. Assassins and shadow dancers were also very powerful professions. Spellcasters are really built with time and money. Soren frowned and looked out of the window. He seemed to hear something moving. It might be the village's elven patrol. After midnight, it was best not to move around outside. Even if you were just strolling around, others wouldn't believe that you were strolling. They would suspect you and even treat you as a thief or a robber with bad intentions. There was a faint cry of surprise. However, it wasn't very loud and disappeared after a while. Soren quietly looked outside and saw torches in the distance. It seemed that there were more than 10 elven guards gathered near the temple. Every village had a very small temple, where priests who served the elven god lived. Most of the temples were built in the cities, and the priests in the villages were apprentice priests with a profession level of about 5. The divine spells they could use were limited. Soren thought for a while and decided to level up as a rogue first. Compared to wizards, he was more familiar with rogues. Whether it was fighting or dealing with various situations, he could only use about half of the effect of leveling up as a wizard. However, Soren could use 120% of the effect of leveling up as a rogue. Moreover, rogues could also advance a second time if the conditions allowed, and it was even possible to advance to the limit for the 3rd time. Here, it was necessary to mention the rogue advancement. There were many branches to the rogue advancement. Godly thief, rogue swordsman, bounty hunter, assassin, stealth, and lurker, and shadow dancer, which was more inclined to the ability to steal and hide. In addition, there were semi-advanced professions, Ronin, dark guard, undead hunter, and so on. There were also legendary professions, shadow walker, night mask, treasure hunter, shadow assassin, and so on. The professions that advanced for the 3rd time were very special. They were already in the realm of the gods, and the types were quite rare. The most representative was the Shadow Master. The second job advancement depended on whether or not the requirements were met. If the job advancement was successful, the job advancement would be replaced. Soren once wanted to advance from Lurker to Shadow Lord, but he failed in the end. He couldn't get the Shadow Dancer's shard. In the Battle of the Ogres in Whiterun, the Storm Lord was a priest and a barbarian. At the same time, she advanced to the legendary profession, Storm Lord. According to Soren's estimation, her Storm Lord profession level was at most level 3. If he had gotten the Shadow Dancer's shard, then his level 5, Lurker, would have been replaced with a level 5, Shadow Walker, and finally become a level 1, Shadow Master. The overall profession level didn't change, but because of the advancement, there would be a great improvement in ability. If Soren remembered correctly, the god he was most familiar with was the Shadow Dancer. His profession level was level 10 Rogue, level 10 Night Mask, level 5 Shadow Dominator, level 5 Shadow Weaver. In addition, there was also the level 10 Shadow God given by the Shard of Divinity. The total profession level was 40. If you wanted to stand side by side with the gods, you must learn to restrain yourself. Restrain your desire to learn random abilities. Dividing your energy would never be better than focusing on one field. Strictly speaking, Soren's path of improvement was still in the direction of Shadow Master, because the Shadow Master required a high rogue level and casting ability. Advancement had many requirements for attributes, skills, and abilities. Generally, the higher the attribute of a person's ability, the more advanced professions they could choose. Now, even if he didn't change his profession to Shadow Wizard, he could reach the casting level to advance to the Shadow Master. If there was no casting level, then the only way to advance was the Shard of Divinity. Soren sat at the table and thought about his future path of improvement. This was a very cautious decision because if he chose wrong, he would have to take a lot of detours. In the end, he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal. He wouldn't be able to integrate his abilities, and he would just be sloppy in everything. If he couldn't get the Shard of Divinity, the final result would be nothing more than a half-baked legendary profession. The saints could kill him with one hand. In the beginning, he dared to fight against a purebred legendary wizard because he was a purebred legendary rogue. When a certain ability was strengthened to the limit, the last thing he would touch was the power of the law. To advance to an assassin, I need to master more than 200 points of alchemy and poison to reach the maximum level. Then the second advancement will change the assassin into a specter assassin. I can already release level 3 spells, so I can probably become a specter assassin when I reach a higher level. In the future, if I can go to the orcs' territory, I can also learn the spell-like ability Mirror Image. My combat power will undoubtedly be much stronger than before. Soren took out a piece of paper and began to write densely packed symbols and words on it. These were the profession's levels in his past memory, as well as the abilities that could be mastered through training. Advanced professions all focused on one aspect. If a rogue could do everything, whether it was stealing, fighting, or sneaking, then other advanced professions focused on one aspect. That was, they specialized in one aspect. Soren wrote a lot of words on the paper, estimated to be thousands of words and symbols. When he finished listing all kinds of memory information, it was already close to dawn. From an assassin to a specter assassin, there are a total of 3 abilities, all of which are very difficult to train. Soren looked at the ability data on the table, then drew a few lines, connected the specter assassin's ability to the wizard level, and finally included it in the Shadow Lord's advancement requirements. He frowned and said, there are still 12 abilities, 5 free attribute points, more than 500 skill points, and a piece of Shard of Divinity. Sigh. Soren sighed and then said to himself, sure enough, my innate attributes are still not enough. Without the genius attributes of the hero mode, it's impossible to advance in a short time with my current talent. After listing the data, Soren took out another piece of paper and began to calculate the ability bonus of the Shadow Dancer. Advanced professions all had some innate abilities. The ultimate purpose of these abilities was to stack up to meet the requirements of advancing to some legendary professions. Just like the Dragon Disciple, if you didn't have the ability of a warlock, you would never be able to advance. Soren didn't finish the deduction of the Shadow Dancer's advancement until dawn. He looked at the dense symbols and murmured, the Shadow Dancer can advance to a Shadow Walker. It's enough for stealth, evasion, and shadow mastery. Basically, I don't need to spend extra time training my abilities, but I seem to be missing 2 or 3 abilities. Then there's the advancement to a Shadow Lord. There's still a big gap. Soren hit his forehead hard and drove the complicated calculations out of his head. He then walked to the window and took a deep breath. No matter how much he advanced, he couldn't reach the most basic requirements for Shadow Dominator. 450 points in Sneak, 300 points in Dodge, 300 points in Literacy, Plain, 150 points in Detect, 150 points in Search, 150 points in Spell Identification. Shadow Dominator, Talent, Shadow Jump, Legendary, Interdimensional Teleportation, Shadow Domain, Legendary, 30 points in Dexterity, 25 points in Wisdom, and so on. It's useless. Soren put away the paper on the table and murmured, no matter how I stack up my advancement, it's useless. In the end, there's still a big gap. The second advancement was a legendary profession. The Shadow Lord belonged to the third advancement, and its abilities were on the same level as the gods. No matter how hard he tried to recall, he couldn't find a way to advance as soon as possible. Most of the abilities required him to spend a long time to train and master, and this time could be as long as 10 or even dozens of years. Without divinity, unless I'm also a son of God, my attributes won't reach the required level. Soren sighed and tore the paper into pieces. Then a little flame appeared on his fingertips, and soon all the statistics were burned to ashes. He sat down again, picked up the pen and made a few strokes, connecting many complicated symbols and words together. He said to himself, if I can't advance to a Shadow Lord, then I can only look at what's in front of me. Assassin. Shadow Dancer. Bounty Hunter. Soren drew 3 symbols on the paper, and then listed the symbols of Warrior, Ranger, Wizard, Warlock, Priest, and so on. He closed his eyes and thought for a long time, trying to deduce the combat abilities of each profession in his memory. This kind of feeling was a bit like a scientist deducing engineering methods in his mind, or a simulation of a tactical sand table in his mind. After a long time, he slowly opened his eyes and said, it seems that the Shadow Dancer's ability to deal with enemies is the strongest. No matter what profession the enemy is, there's no obvious shortcoming. So, should I advance to a Shadow Dancer? Then find a way to advance to a Shadow Walker? The time of troubles. Damn it. How can mortals fight against the gods and saints who came to the mortal world without absolute talent? Now that there's no one to kill them, how can so many gods fight? If only I had the talent of a warlock, I could advance to a dragon disciple first, and then find the card of fate to advance to a destiny warlock. No matter what gods I encounter in the future, I can't not fight back at all. There was an insurmountable gap between the gods and mortals. Soren calculated for a whole night. The only advanced profession he knew that could fight against the gods was the Shadow Master. No matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not meet the basic conditions for advancement. The dragons had begun to appear. The legendary professions also appeared one after another. It would not be long before the Son of God and the demigod appeared. No one knew the pressure in his heart. Escape could only be temporary. Even if he escaped to the Frost Kingdom with Vivian, sooner or later he would still have to face these high and mighty gods. Not to mention that Vivian might also be the son of fear. Dang, dang, dang. There was a soft knock on the door under the morning sun. The knocking position was very low. When Soren opened the door, he was not surprised to see the little Vivian. She was holding a large tray with oatmeal and snacks on it. Because of her small size, she had a hard time holding it. But when Soren opened the door, she immediately raised her little head and smiled, "Brother. I've brought you breakfast." Soren reached out and took the tray, picked up the little Vivian, and kissed her pink and tender cheek. At this moment, he made the worst decision in his heart. If there was really no other way, he would give up his life and advance to a Shadow Lich. Chapter 113. It was a simple and heartwarming breakfast. When Soren brought little Vivian downstairs, Gloria also happened to come out at the same time. She glanced at the little girl next to her, and her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Only a sentence rang in Soren's ears: "Vivian had a nightmare last night again." Soren nodded silently, and his face was dignified, but he did not speak. This was already the third time. As time passed, the signs that Vivian was the child of God became more and more obvious. The frequency of her nightmares also increased, and the interval between the last two nightmares was even shorter. Although the little girl often smiled and did not say anything, Soren knew that she must have guessed something. Vivian had been very smart since she was a child. Although she did not like to show it, she was definitely not a simple and obedient little girl. Most of the time, she was smarter and sharper than Soren, but it was not obvious because of her age. After all, she was only 8 years old this year. When they went downstairs, the halfling's figure had just come in from outside the door. There were obvious wet marks on his feet, and it seemed that he had been outside. Aladdin quietly walked to Soren's side, found a stool, and sat down. Then he whispered, "Last night, the elven patrol was attacked. It seemed that it was done by were creatures who believed in the god of the hunt, but I couldn't find out what kind of were creatures did it. The elven patrol was very angry, and it seemed that they were going to contact the other patrol teams." Were creatures. They mainly referred to humanoid creatures, such as gnolls, taurens, lion-faced people, centaurs, tiger-headed monsters, half-shepherds, harpies, sirens, and so on. These creatures had some obvious human characteristics, and some obvious beast characteristics. It was said that they were the product of some taboo experiments during the Arcane Empire. Some of them were ancient life forms that had existed for a long time, and most of them were scattered around the world. There was also an intelligent life form, the orcs. They were the same kind of life form as humans, but they were not a type of were creatures. Malor, the god of the hunt? Soren frowned and paused for a moment before asking in a low voice, "Are you sure it was its followers that attacked the elves?" Aladdin nodded with certainty. "I'm very sure. Looks like trouble." Soren raised his head and looked at Gloria. Suddenly, he said to the halfling beside him, "We're going to leave soon. Do you want to continue traveling with us, or do you have other plans?" "Leaving so suddenly?" The halfling looked at Soren with some astonishment. Gloria, who was next to him, also raised her head in surprise. Aladdin was still puzzled, but the Northern Witch took a deep look at Soren and nodded gently, "Yes. We'll continue our journey to the Frost Kingdom." The halfling showed a troubled expression and whispered, "Why are we going so far away? It's cold there, isn't it?" The door of the hotel was pushed open. A gloomy elven guard walked in. He glanced around the hotel, and his eyes stopped on Soren for a moment before he closed the door and left. There were no followers of the god of the hunt in this hotel. Soren quickly stood up, looked at Gloria and said, "Pack your things, we'll leave soon." The halfling was obviously in a dilemma. He stood in place and thought for a long time before he whispered, "I don't plan to go so far away. Let's part ways here. Come find me in the Shire when you have time. I'll treat you to a big meal." Soren smiled and replied, "Okay. You'd better not get involved in this matter. The followers of the god of the hunt are crazy." Obviously. Soren held back his curiosity and did not go down last night. However, the halfling could not hold back his curiosity and went to investigate. They soon decided to leave. Vivian followed them very quietly, and Gloria did not ask much. Only the halfling stayed in place, watching them leave with some pity. The halfling and the witch in front of him must have a story, and the little girl was not simple either. Her talent was undoubtedly very strong. Although rogues were not very clear about the talent of wizards, in the halfling's view, Vivian was undoubtedly an excellent talent for wizards. He hesitated and looked at the location of the temple. In the end, he remembered Soren's warning and did not get involved in this matter. Soren was right, the followers of the god of the hunt were indeed a little crazy. They walked all the way to a very far place. When Soren put Vivian down to rest, Gloria came over with a dignified expression and asked in a deep voice, "Why did you leave so suddenly?" It seemed that she trusted Soren a lot. She did not ask until now. Soren glanced at the village behind him, then slowly said, "The god of the hunt should also be asleep. As a relatively weak god, once he sleeps, it is possible that the followers and priests will not be able to obtain divine spells. I guess this attack is a hunting ritual." The Northern Witch's knowledge was undoubtedly very rich. She looked at Soren hesitantly and murmured, "You mean, this attack may be for the legendary blood?" Soren nodded silently and said in a deep voice, "The god of the hunt is only interested in legendary hunting rituals." The god of the hunt, Malor. It was a primitive god with weak divine power. It was also known as the king of beasts, the beast of black blood. It was a chaotic and evil god. It liked bloody killings and ruthless hunting rituals. The more powerful the target was, the easier it was to attract its attention. His body was a creature that looked like an ape but had a ferocious face. He had black hair and blood-red skin. His face was somewhat like that of an orc, but his appearance was more ugly and ferocious. Many gods were not human or human-like creatures. Some were purely intelligent beasts. The god of the hunt, Malor, was such a god. He was a rare monster that became a god for some reason. His followers were mainly evil war-creatures, hunters who enjoyed hunting, people who liked blood, and some fallen rangers like Droll. This was the easiest god to awaken. He had a strong desire for legendary blood. As long as the target was legendary or above, it was possible to attract his avatar. There were many war-creature groups nearby that believed in the god of the hunt. Soren estimated that there was at least a 50% chance that the war-creatures were holding some kind of ritual. In the legendary blood hunting ritual, the war-creatures would also hunt a large number of ordinary creatures to pave the way. Malor was a very strange god. He liked to hunt powerful targets. The more powerful the prey, the easier it was to attract his attention. If it was just killing ordinary creatures, he would not even care at all. This kind of legendary hunting ritual could strengthen his divine power. In order to please this evil god, his followers would try to hunt legendary targets every once in a while. At first, it was wild beasts. Later, even intelligent creatures were included in the list. The Northern Witch took a deep look into the distance and said in a low voice, "There's a red copper dragon nearby. Could it be that it's the target?" Legendary creatures. Dragons were undoubtedly the most standard legendary creatures. Soren also thought for a moment. He looked at the other party and said, "It's not that easy to kill a dragon. If it's not necessary, Malor's followers would not try to kill a dragon." Creatures of the chaotic evil alignment were more crazy. Malor's followers were some very crazy guys. Soren could not determine their goal and did not want to have too much interaction with them. In the dense virgin forest, a dark knoll was leaping between the trees. It was different from the knolls Soren had seen before. This knoll was more agile and more dangerous. Its pupils were green, and its figure was like a phantom shuttling through the forest. It often flew past in a flash, and it was difficult to catch its trace with the naked eye. It was wearing some kind of leather armor sewn from the skin of some kind of black beast. There were no weapons on its body, but at the position of its claws, one could see the cold light of steel. Its claws were actually replaced with metal by some kind of special method. Patter. The knoll whose level could not be determined landed. It looked to the side with its green eyes and said in a deep voice, "The ritual is about to begin. We must awaken the attention of the god of the hunt. Without the protection of the gods, the tribe will become weaker and weaker, and our prey will become fewer and fewer." Heavy footsteps were heard. It was a mixed-blood orc with a very strong physique that looked like a little giant. Its face was ferocious and its fangs were exposed. It glanced at the knoll in front of it and said, "The ritual requires legendary-level prey. I know there is a red copper dragon nearby, but it seems that we can't kill it with our strength." The knoll showed a grim smile. There was a metal tooth on its right side. It said, "There is no need to kill the dragon. I know there is a son of fear nearby. The blood of these sons of fear will definitely attract the attention of the Lord more than the dragon. Son of fear? The mixed-blood orc looked around. There were many strange creatures around it. The followers of the god of the hunt were very complicated. There were humans, orcs, and even intelligent beasts, as well as dark creatures that enjoyed hunting. The black gnoll looked at the others and said in a deep voice, "I have seen him use his divine power. It seems that he has just awakened. Some of you go and prepare other sacrifices. The rest of you follow me to track the prey. I believe that using a son of fear as a sacrifice will definitely awaken Mailer's attention." Strong figures flew out. These hunters, whose strength was conservative and above grade 3, spread out. Accompanied by all kinds of strange howls, they quickly scattered into the dense forest. The gnoll raised its metal claws and scratched its face with the sharp claws. Drops of blood dripped down the side of its face. The other creatures that stayed behind did the same. The strong mixed-blood orc cut its forehead with a blade, then knelt down on one knee and began to pray. There was a devout and crazy smile on its face. The hunting ritual. At this moment, it really began. Chapter 114. They were next to a clean rock. Soren was sitting next to them, chewing on dried meat. Gloria didn't seem to have a good appetite, so she only ate a little and put it down. The northern witches were of noble birth, so they didn't like this kind of inferior food. She would only eat some snacks and drink some water in the wild. Vivian wasn't picky at all. Whether it was a delicious meal or a tasteless dry food, the little girl could eat it with relish. She even raised her little white hand to wipe Soren's mouth. "Who is it?" Soren's hand that was holding the dry food suddenly paused. He jumped up in an instant, pulled out his curved sword, and shouted towards the distant woods, "Who is it? Come out quickly. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." Gloria also reacted very quickly. She instantly took out a staff from her multidimensional bag, and the gems that stored spells on it slightly glowed. Vivian's small body stood behind Soren, and there seemed to be some doubt on her face. She looked up at the woods not far away, and her expression was difficult to describe with words. She also seemed to be a little confused. "Sorry." A magnetic voice sounded, and then a very handsome elven ranger came out. He was so eye-catching just by standing there. If Soren's appearance with a trace of half-elf blood was relatively handsome, then compared to the elven ranger in front of them, he was even worse than an ordinary person. With just a glance, both men and women would be affected by his handsome appearance for a while. He was like the protagonist of a story in a tavern. Even if it was just a glance, he could make noble ladies blush and their hearts beat faster. This was an extremely handsome elven ranger. Even Soren couldn't describe his handsome appearance with words. He could only say that he was favored by the elven gods. Gloria's eyes lit up for a moment, and then she slightly frowned. The northern witches still retained the characteristics of the northerners. They appreciated the strong with perseverance. The elven ranger in front of them was too handsome, so handsome that it felt a little surreal. The elven ranger landed lightly on the ground and jumped down from the tree. He glanced at Soren's face, then glanced at Gloria, and finally stopped at Vivian who was behind her. He said, "I don't mean any harm. I'm just passing by." Soren didn't relax at all. He said in a deep voice, "Then please leave." The elven ranger did not leave immediately. He smiled and looked very friendly. He took a step forward and said, "Don't be so nervous. I'm a ranger who believes in the god of nature. Stop." Soren's expression was still serious as he said in a low voice, "We don't know you, please leave this place." The elven ranger's stiff eyebrows slightly wrinkled. He glanced at Soren, then turned his eyes to Gloria. He showed a charming smile and slowly said, "Dear lady, your companion doesn't seem to be very friendly to me. I think he may have misunderstood me. I just happened to pass by. It's very dangerous to travel alone in the wilderness. Maybe we can travel together. Where are you going?" Gloria gently lifted her long hair. The veil on her face prevented him from seeing her expression. He only heard her slowly say, "Back off, stranger." At this moment, Vivian suddenly pulled Soren's clothes with her small hand and whispered, "Brother. This person looks very familiar, but I don't think I've seen him before." The little girl had a very good memory. She could remember most of the people she met. The elven ranger in front of her had very good hearing. He seemed to have heard Vivian's words. He grabbed his head and showed a kind smile, then said softly, "Hello. Lovely little girl. You also give me a familiar feeling. Maybe we've met before." Soren and Gloria looked at each other in an instant, and the alert look on their faces became more dignified. Although the elven ranger in front of them looked very handsome and had a harmless smile, the two of them didn't feel that he was friendly at all. When they first met the halfling, Aladdin was standing on the side of the road. When he saw them, he even jumped up and waved at them. At a glance, they knew that he didn't have any hostility. But the elven ranger in front of them was different. He had obviously snuck up on them. He only showed himself when Soren noticed him. His seemingly friendly smile was probably just a disguise. His acting skills must be very good. The elven ranger didn't seem to think that he would encounter such a situation. With his incomparably handsome appearance and friendly smile, he rarely attracted any hostility from others. However, the two people in front of him looked like they were ready to fight at any time. No matter how handsome or friendly his smile was, it couldn't change the other party's attitude. If he had directly walked over, Soren wouldn't be so hostile. However, the elven ranger was quietly hiding nearby and only showed up after being discovered. This was very strange. Vivian gently wrinkled her nose and whispered, "Brother, let him go." The three of them didn't like him very much. The elven ranger's expression was a little stiff, but he still forced a smile and then retreated into the forest. When he turned around, his face instantly became gloomy. He did pass by because he accidentally discovered them. He seemed to have sensed something and approached them. At first, he just wanted to observe them quietly. However, he didn't expect to be discovered by Soren as soon as he sneaked over. This was a very powerful rogue. The elven ranger's stealth ability was also very strong. The fact that he was discovered in an instant only proved that the other party was much more experienced in stealth than him. He didn't know how Soren discovered him, but to be able to discover him, he was definitely a first-class rogue. Soren held his curved sword tightly. After making sure that the elven ranger had really left, he nodded and said in a deep voice, "Let's move on." There was something wrong with that elven ranger just now. Gloria looked into the distance and immediately cast Lighten. Soren carried Vivian on his back, and the three of them continued to move forward. Those who were proficient in stealth would naturally be able to discover signs of stealth. In order to hide from Soren's perception, one would need at least 150 points in stealth. Although the elven ranger was also proficient in stealth, he couldn't be compared to a professional rogue. If it was the halfling Aladdin, Soren wouldn't be able to discover him so easily. This was the territory of the elves. It was normal to encounter elven rangers here. Soren carried Vivian on his back and continued to move forward. Gloria seemed to have something on her mind along the way, and she would look back from time to time. "What's wrong?" Soren noticed her abnormality and asked, "Is there something wrong?" Gloria was silent for a moment. Then her lips moved slightly, and she used a level 0 communication spell and said, "That elven ranger just now looked a little like Vivian. He also seemed to have something different about him. And he was too handsome, he didn't look like an elf at all." These were the words that entered Soren's ears, but her voice was, "Nothing. I just wanted to see if that elven ranger was following us." Elves were very handsome. But the elven ranger just now was not only handsome, his appearance could even affect the attitude of others. It was like some creatures with the talent of charm. If you approached them, you would have to go through a test of will. Otherwise, you would be affected. Soren was about to say something, but suddenly there was a dull roar behind him. It sounded a little like the roar of an orc, which had a unique wild nature. Soren swallowed the words he wanted to say and prepared for battle in an instant. Gloria also cast a defensive spell with a dignified expression, and then pulled Vivian behind her. A woo. The howl of the gnolls was heard, and it was like a sign, and all kinds of howls could be heard from all directions. These sounds were very mixed, and Soren even heard the low roar of a cheetah. The sound was not far from where they were, and they could vaguely hear the roar of battle, and all kinds of howls that were gradually approaching. Not good. Soren's expression changed slightly, and he pulled Gloria up and said, "It seems to be a believer of the god of hunting, let's go." Chapter 115. Howls and howls could be heard. A figure could be seen leaping through the trees in the distance, followed by a few other dark figures. The roars of the beast men were getting closer and closer. Soren carried Vivian on his back and prepared to retreat. Gloria also quickly cast a spell, but the monsters in all directions seemed to have noticed them. They could vaguely see a few strong figures jumping down from the trees, planning to go around and block them. One of the figures was very eye-catching. It was a large black cheetah. A mutated beast. Some special beasts had mutated genes, possibly related to the forbidden experiments of the Arcane Empire. They had appeared in large numbers for a period of time, but many of them were hunted down and killed. The remaining ones escaped to the astral plane and the outer realms. Some of the beasts in the material plane had inherited these mutated genes. When a creature's level reached a certain level, it was possible for them to mutate. These beasts had spell-like abilities, but they were very rare. Most of them only had high intelligence and powerful hunting abilities. These beasts were said to be the failed products of the war creature experiment. Soren stopped and handed Vivian to Gloria. The black cheetah in front of them was very difficult to deal with. Its body was almost the size of a Siberian tiger, and its elegant body had obvious muscle contours. It was like a bodybuilding champion among beasts. This meant that the cheetah was very strong. It was even stronger than a brown bear, and its claws could tear through armor. The cheetah's speed was very scary. Soren didn't dare to continue running, because it would be exposing his back to the cheetah. In short-distance sprinting, almost no creature could surpass this mutated cheetah. In the wilderness, cheetahs were more dangerous than tigers because it was basically impossible to outrun them on land. Against such creatures, if you tried to run away, they would only pounce on you in an instant, and then mercilessly tear your throat out. Soren took a deep breath as he sprinted. His muscles tensed, and he jumped 10 meters or so. He swung his curved sword and slashed at the cheetah's head. The beast had no protection, and its hide alone couldn't stop his attack. It was a light leap. The large black panther nimbly dodged his attack. At the same time, its face revealed an anthropomorphic mocking smile. This beast's intelligence was higher than expected. Its creature level might have reached grade 3 or above. But it was still too careless. Soren raised his finger and shot out 2 arcane missiles from his fingertips within a second. No matter how fast the panther was, there was no way it could dodge the attack at such a close distance. The next moment, a small hole was opened in its neck. The 2 arcane missiles had pierced through its skin, leaving a wound about 3 centimeters deep. Blood immediately splashed out. With Soren's spell power, the 2 arcane missiles at such close range dealt at least 20 damage. 1 point of spell power could increase the damage of the arcane missiles by 1 point. A high-grade wizard could easily pierce through armor with arcane missiles. Soren's spell power was also around 10 points. Even if he didn't use vitality, he could still inflict light damage to the target. The wounded cheetah was obviously a bit slow. Soren quickly followed up with a swing of his curved sword, and blood splashed out as he slashed at the cheetah's back. The slash left a wound about 5 centimeters deep. But after breaking through the muscles, he couldn't continue. He could only withdraw his sword and retreat. His vitality reduced the damage taken. 2 points of vitality increased damage reduction by 1 point. Some creatures with strong vitality could even use their muscles to clamp down on weapons. Dragons were the best of the best. Without extraordinary weapons, it would be very difficult to kill a dragon subspecies. Even if one could break its dragon skin, they would not be able to break through its tough muscles, and they would not be able to damage its vital organs. Therefore, it would be very difficult to kill a dragon subspecies with just bleeding damage. Sharp claws slashed through the air. The thick and tough cheetah's tail whipped at Soren, and the wind whistled like a whip. Soren twisted his body to avoid the attack. 3 shallow scratches were left on his arm, and his waist was hit by the tail. But with his vitality, he could still withstand it. The other monsters nearby were getting closer and closer. Soren didn't have time to waste. He instantly took out his wooden cane and pointed it at the cheetah in front of him. A flash of light appeared. The weeds on the ground suddenly grew wildly, and they wrapped around the cheetah like tenacious vines. Even if the cheetah had the strength of a large cat, it couldn't break free in a short time. This short 1 or 2 seconds was more than enough for Soren. He jumped onto the cheetah's back and used his strength to push it down. Then, he held his curved sword tightly with both hands and slashed down. The power of sword form, heavy hack exploded in an instant, and the curved sword cut off the cheetah's head. Blood spurted out 3 to 5 meters away. The headless body of the cheetah stiffened for a moment, and then fell to the ground with a thud. A row of data appeared: activated sword form, heavy hack. Activated decapitation. Dealt 125 decapitation damage to the target. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've received 2450 slaughter EXP. It was indeed a grade 3 cheetah. The creature's level was estimated to be around level 12. If it wasn't for the surprise attack, it would be more difficult to deal with it than dealing with the earth elementals. Big brother, be careful. Suddenly, Vivian's scream came from behind Soren. Gloria also quickly cast a spell in an instant. First, she buffed them with a spell, then raised her hand and shot a blood-red light in front of them. Finger of Death. The sound of the bowstring vibrating could be heard. Soren didn't think much and activated the elemental stone on his body. A yellowish mark on the ground spread to his body. Almost at the same time as the stone skin spell was cast on his body, a sharp arrow flew over and hit him directly in the chest. The force of the arrow caused him to take a step back. Next to the bushes in front of him, a tall and burly orc with a strong bow in his hand locked onto Soren with a ferocious gaze. But in the next moment, its gaze turned into shock. Soren did not fall. The arrow hit his chest, but it was only stuck between his ribs. The arrow should have pierced him directly, but it was offset by stone skin, which reduced the damage by 20 points. In addition, Soren had 20 points of constitution, so although the arrow hit his chest, it did not cause as much damage as expected. He gritted his teeth and pulled out the arrow. The leather armor in front of his chest was pierced. The opponent used a strong bow. The dark red light hit the tall and burly orc in the next moment. Its body stiffened, and then it fell straight to the ground. Level 7 spell, Finger of Death. The Finger of Death cast by a high-grade northern witch was not a joke. It was not easy for any profession below grade 4 to pass the test of death. If they couldn't pass the test of death, they would die in an instant. After pulling out the arrow, Soren didn't care about the wound. He swung his sword to block the attack of another mixed-blood orc next to him. The heavy battle axe with ferocious force made his whole body sink. A gnoll mixed-blood creature on the left threw out a short axe and hit Soren's back in the next moment. Clang! The short axe seemed to have hit solid marble. Soren's leather armor was only dented a little, and he almost didn't suffer any damage. The opponent's strength wasn't high, and they probably didn't have special training in throwing weapons. The attack of the short axe didn't exceed 20 points, and it couldn't break through Soren's stone skin. The presence of the northern witch attracted most of the hunters' attention. At least more than half of the hunters bypassed Soren and rushed to Gloria and Vivian behind him. Wizards were the most terrifying existences. They must not be given the chance to cast spells. A monster with a ferocious face that even Soren couldn't recognize roared, and its body suddenly began to grow. It then took a deep breath and sprinted on the ground with all 4 limbs. Its speed was almost unbelievable. It was a berserk orc. In the face of such a dangerous situation, Gloria was still as calm as ever. She even had the time to pull Vivian behind her. Then, she abruptly pulled out her magic staff and pointed it forward. A fireball the size of a washbasin flew out. Its target wasn't the enemy in front of her, but the empty space in front of her. 1 second ago, the sprinting monster didn't have time to stop. It was completely inertia. When it rushed over, it just happened to enter the core area of the fireball's explosion. The next second, its whole body was covered in blood and flesh. Its chest was blown to the bone, and its hair was burning. Vivian, look carefully. Gloria had an awe-inspiring aura. She was completely different from the one Soren knew. She said in a cold voice, "Do you still remember the movement calculation I taught you? Movement positioning and spell prediction are very important skills. Many enemies are very fast, and spells don't have to be aimed at the enemy to be effective." The whistling sound of the wind was heard. 2 flying axes and a long sword were thrown towards the two of them. Gloria didn't care at all. She slammed her wand into the ground, and then her hands quickly cast a spell. At the same time, she said, "Spell protection field is the foundation of a spellcaster. When fighting, you have to make sure that you are covered by the energy protection field at all times." Bang, bang, bang. The thrown weapons seemed to hit the invisible air, and when they hit the energy protection field, they made a muffled sound. Gloria's expression didn't change at all. It seemed that she didn't see the enemies rushing over at all. Focus was the most important basic skill for a spellcaster in a battle. A spellcaster couldn't be distracted and let the enemy interrupt their spellcasting. The skill of focus also made them more sensitive to the changes around them. Shadow tentacles. 6 energy tentacles broke out of the ground and shot out in an instant. Half of the enemies nearby were instantly stunned, and then they were rolled up and hung upside down by the energy tentacles. The shadow tentacles cast by the high-grade witches were completely different from Soren's. The energy tentacles wrapped up and directly strangled 2 enemies, and then all the nearby enemies were dragged back and hung in the air. Only then did Gloria slowly pull out her staff and say in a serious voice, "Vivian. You have to always remember that for a wizard, control is more important than damage." The battlefield was strangely silent for a moment. Everyone, including Soren, also saw the real strength of a high-grade northern witch at this moment. This was the style of a high-grade wizard. Chapter 116. Soren didn't hesitate at all. When the dark tentacles entangled the enemies near Gloria, he quickly pulled out his scimitar and retreated. The scimitar drew a cold light and beheaded the enemies that were entangled by the dark tentacles. Wizards would never be the main damage output. They could only remember a small number of large-scale destructive spells. Even the real damage spells were only single-target fatal spells like Finger of Death. In a battle, the melee professions were always responsible for the last hit. It was better to control the enemy and let the warrior slash them with his scimitar instead of dealing damage. More and more enemies appeared in the vicinity. The number of enemies was completely beyond Soren's estimation. Even Gloria's expression became dignified. She said in a deep voice, "My spell slots can't deal with so many enemies." The number of enemies was more than 100. All of them were creatures above grade 2. They were believers of the god of hunting and were much stronger than the guards of Whiterun. The believers of the gods must have stronger fighting abilities. If the god of hunting hadn't fallen into a deep sleep, perhaps there would have been existences among these monsters that could use divine spells. The power of the weak gods was not enough. They were weakened a lot before the time of troubles. They would only grant divine spells to their core believers and priests. Other believers who were not valued would lose the ability to use divine spells. These monsters held hunting rituals to awaken the gods' attention. As long as they proved their value, the god of hunting might regard them as more useful believers and grant them divine spells. Those worthless believers would be deprived of their divine spells because the power of the god of hunting was also declining. The time of troubles. All the gods' divinity level was declining. When their divinity level was exhausted, they would fall to the mortal world. The weaker the gods, the faster they would fall. Only when the energy storm of the time of troubles was over would they regain their divinity level and return to the kingdom of the gods. The gods who walked in the mortal world were saints. They didn't have divinity levels. They only retained their initial profession level, so some of them were very weak. Some of them relied on luck to ascend to godhood. Their own strength was not very strong. They were only around the high-grade legendary level. They relied on their divinity level to break through to a total level of more than 40. This was why there had been cases of weaker deities killing stronger deities. The reason for this was that after losing their divine cores, the difference in strength between the two parties would not be too great. However, when the gods descended to the mortal world as saints, their average attributes were basically above 25 points. Even without the power brought by the level of divinity, the difference in their attributes could completely crush any mortal. A small number of powerful deities could reach up to 50 points in their attributes. When faced with the goddess of magic who had 50 points of intelligence, even legendary wizards would feel that their spells were like sideshows. Among the abyssal demon gods, they were known for their strength. It was no joke for them to be able to move mountains and fill seas with their bare hands. There were more and more believers of the god of hunting. Soren realized the severity of the situation. Gloria's spell slots could not handle so many enemies. Just as he was about to cover Gloria's escape, a loud howl came from behind. Then, the elven ranger rushed out. He looked very embarrassed. There were 7 or 8 bloodstains on his body. His handsome face was torn by sharp claws. He was almost completely disfigured. He was holding a long sword in his hand, and the way he held the sword was very strange. Upon closer inspection, one of his fingers was broken. It seemed that his little finger was bitten off by some beast. When the elven ranger saw Soren and the others, his eyes immediately showed a look of surprise. Then, his expression became vicious. He suddenly leaped and left the hunters behind him, who were obviously much stronger. At the same time, he quickly approached them. It turned out that he was the target of the believers of the god of hunting. Behind him, there were obviously more powerful hunters and trackers. A group of monsters gave up on Soren and the others and rushed toward the elven ranger in front of them. This was the most important goal. They must not let the elven ranger in front of them escape. Otherwise, this hunting ritual would be considered a failure. Death Sphere. The elven ranger did not make any casting movements, not even a spell. He raised his hand and a light appeared. Then, a wave of fear aura exploded among the enemies blocking the way. This was not a divine spell that could be used by high-grade rangers, nor was it an arcane spell cast by wizards. It was a special spell-like ability. It might be a talent that the elven ranger had. A large number of creatures froze in place. Then, many of them showed fear on their faces, as if something terrible was happening. They fled in panic in all directions. There were even a small number of enemies who turned blue and died on the spot. They were scared to death. The elven ranger scattered the enemies in front of him with fear. Then, he suddenly sped up and rushed over, getting closer and closer to Soren. Damn it! Soren's expression was very ugly for a moment. Gloria next to him also looked dignified. Because just a spell-like attack, they were sure of the identity of the elven ranger in front of them. Son of Fear. Other than the son of the Dread Lord, they really could not think of anyone else who could cast fear at will and achieve the effect of scaring the enemy to death. A gnoll whose whole body was dark like a shadow appeared. It stretched out its scarlet tongue and licked the corner of its mouth. Its metal claws flashed a cold light. It grinned and said, "The flesh of the son of fear is really extraordinary." I felt an exuberant life force. Maybe after the ritual is completed and we kill him, we can have a good meal ourselves. The majestic hybrid orc strode out of the forest, carrying a giant battle axe that weighed nearly 200 pounds in its hand. It roared, "He is the prey for my lord. After the ritual is completed, we can decide what to do with his body." Soren clenched his curved sword and stared fiercely at the elven ranger who was getting closer and closer. The elven ranger's purpose was very vicious. He actually intended to lead these hunters to them. Soren's murderous intent was very strong. He said, "When he gets close, you find a way to control him. I'll be responsible for killing him." Gloria nodded gently. Her eyes were also full of murderous intent. Killing this guy might make the hunters stop attacking. Even if the possibility was not high, it was worth a try. Besides, this guy was definitely not running towards them with good intentions. The elven ranger was getting closer and closer, but stopped before entering the range of Gloria's spell. He jumped to a high place and then shouted to the believers in all directions, "I'm not the only son of fear. The little girl over there is also a son of fear. I don't believe it. Look over there." He seemed to have activated some special ability. He raised his hand and pointed in the direction of Soren. A wave of fear aura burst out. Many terrible scenes appeared in Soren's mind. There were mountains of corpses, seas of blood, and piles of bones. There were also all kinds of cruel and horrible scenes. However, how could his will be so easily shaken? It only took a moment for him to suppress this feeling of fear. At the same time, a series of data flashed in front of his eyes. You are affected by fear aura. Test of will triggered. Successfully passed, death fright. Successfully resisted the effect of fear. Gloria's will was obviously very high. She was only a little startled and quickly recovered. But what everyone did not expect was Vivian, who was standing behind Gloria, suddenly trembled all over. Then her eyes suddenly widened, and her cute little face was pale. Her face seemed to be slightly blue because of fear, as if she was trying to suppress something. When her emotions accumulated to a certain limit, she suddenly let out a very sharp scream. Ah! An invisible sound wave spread, and the first to bear the brunt was Soren. His ears were buzzing, and traces of blood were oozing out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Then there was Gloria, who was standing next to him. Her face was very pale, as if some kind of spell had been activated. Suddenly, a flash of light protected her in it. Her figure swayed and almost fell to the ground. The terrible sound wave spread out. The nearby Mailer believers fell in batches like wheat being cut down. At least half of them died directly under the sound wave. All the others were bleeding from their 7 orifices, and their figures were obviously shaking. The only ones who were not affected much were the powerful hunters. They were grade 4 professions. This level of attack could only hurt them, but it was not fatal. The elven ranger showed a vicious smile on his face and said, "Did you see that? She is also a child of fear. It seems that the 2 people around her are a little weak. The children of fear that have just awakened are very weak. Why don't you kill them first? It should be easier to kill them than to kill me, right?" The dark gnoll showed a sneer. After glancing at the prey in front of him, he said with a ferocious expression, "I like your vicious heart. But if we offer 2 children of fear as sacrifices, we will definitely be rewarded by our Lord." An invisible sound wave spread rapidly, and all the beasts within a 5-kilometer radius seemed to be greatly frightened, and all of them frantically fled in all directions. In an ancient cave, a droll who was meditating with his eyes closed suddenly opened his eyes. He slowly stood up. As an elf, he was unusually tall and strong, like a solid rock. He walked out of the cave with heavy steps, looked at the chaotic forest in the distance, and murmured, "Who scared them?" An eagle fell from the sky. After it landed, it turned into the figure of a droll. It humbly lowered its head and said, "Your Excellency Earthwalker." Farther away, somewhere in a dark underground secret room, the black-robed priest on the altar suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were shining, and he said fanatically, "The first child of fear has awakened. Let the hand of despair go. Find him at all costs." Time froze at this moment. Soren's eyes suddenly became bloodshot. That was because the burst of power in his body made his blood surge. His heart accelerated to the limit in an instant. His kidneys secreted crazily, and the excessive congestion turned his pupils into a blood-red color. His face was a little distorted, and his expression was very ferocious. His originally injured body began to gradually recover. As a large amount of slaughter EXP was consumed, his injuries became lighter and lighter. His figure also became more and more blurred, as if he was about to disappear in the shadows. Behind him, Soren's shadow was distorted. The next moment, he rushed toward the elven ranger in front of him, and his figure disappeared out of thin air. The entire material plane also completely lost track of him in this second. Shadow plane travel. P.S. This chapter was written very slowly. It took me a long time to edit it, so the update is half an hour late. 2 updates today, more updates tomorrow. Chapter 117. Everything happened in 1 second. When Soren's figure disappeared into thin air, everything in front of him turned gray. The sky was an eternal gray, even the sunlight and the moonlight were the same color. This 1 second was very short, and Soren's surroundings were rapidly moving backward. His body was assimilated by the shadows in a short period of time and temporarily transformed into the form of a shadow creature. The physical body became illusory. The surrounding scenery was also distorted. Plane travel opened a dimensional passage to the shadow plane, which was a spell-like teleportation ability. It could only be used for a few seconds, and it didn't really enter the shadow plane. The next moment, he appeared behind the elven ranger. The elven ranger's shadow twisted strangely. The ferocious shadow turned into a distorted outline, and finally turned into Soren's shadow. Then, a vague figure covered by shadows suddenly appeared. The elven ranger still had a vicious smile on his face. Anyway, he had achieved his goal. The hunters had obviously assigned some of their manpower to deal with Soren and Gloria. This way, he would be in less danger. As long as the hunters were restrained by the 3 people next to him, he would have a great chance to escape with his ability. After all, he was also a son of fear. He even began to plan his escape route. He didn't even have time to change the expression on his face. Just like that, his body suddenly stiffened. The sharp tip of the blade pierced through his chest and pierced his heart in an instant. Then, with a loud shout, the blade twisted violently. Die. Soren's expression was ferocious. He held the blade with both hands and twisted it. The blade broke through the elven ranger's armor and pierced through his heart. At the same time, it twisted a bloody hole in his chest. A crack appeared on the exquisite military-grade curved sword. This weapon couldn't withstand Soren's sudden burst of strength and showed signs of cracking. The shadow behind him was still twisting. The elven ranger's shadow overlapped with his own. His whole person looked gray, like a black shadow. When he pulled out the curved sword, the shadow returned to its original appearance, and the blurry face gradually became clear. The elven ranger's body fell straight to the ground. In a situation that no one expected, he was directly killed by Soren. The gnoll's ferocious smile remained stiffly on his face. The other hunters were in disbelief. A bunch of data crazily appeared. Activate dark vision. Activate shadow hide. Activate shadow jump. Activate shadow strike. Shadow hide successful. Ability, evade sight, activated. Shadow jump successful. Activate crossplane shadow jump ability. Shadow strike successful. You received 9 points of shadow damage. Activated backstab. You have dealt 121 points of fatal damage. Target killed. Extracted soul energy of the soul. You have gained 3,600 slaughter EXP. Target is a divine creature. Divine power extracted. Divine power. Received 3 divinity. Of the target. Failed. Divinity storage. Clergy storage of the divinity. You don't have any divine spark or divine domain to store the divine power of fear. Target of the target, behind the dense jumping data were the data that appeared in the second when Soren exploded. Thief profession has leveled up to level 7. Received 25, DX 20 plus, INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 11, profession HP 6 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. The 11 HP brought about by leveling up temporarily alleviated his injuries. Although his ears were still temporarily deaf, Soren had regained his perception of the outside world. The anger and killing intent in his heart were extremely strong. He did not hesitate to put the slaughter EXP into it. The elven ranger in front of him must die. Such a strong killing intent even made his pupils become blood red because of the expansion of the tiny blood vessels. All the skill points were allocated to evade. Soren reached the requirements to advance into a shadow dancer in an instant, and then chose to advance without hesitation. Advance into a shadow dancer. Advancement requirements: reflex evasion, achieved; flexible movement, achieved; 100 points of sneak, achieved; 50 points of evade, achieved. You have successfully advanced into a shadow dancer. Shadow dancer's ability bonus activated. You have spent an additional 5,000 slaughter EXP. You have learned the profession talent, evade sight. Sneak plus 15, evade plus 20. HP increased by 13, profession HP 8 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. You have gained a free attribute point. You have successfully advanced into a grade 3 profession. You have gained the opportunity to purify your bloodline. You have gained an additional ability point. Advancing into a shadow dancer cost him more than 13,000 slaughter EXP. In addition to the extra 5,000 slaughter EXP, he also needed to pay the soul energy to level up. However, the strength of the advanced profession was also undeniable. Soren lost a skill point allocation from the rogue level, but he gained an additional 10 points of sneak and 20 points of evade. At the same time, he also mastered the most useful ability of the shadow dancer, evade sight. Evade sight, profession talent. The shadow dancer has extraordinary shadow skills. This skill is not comparable to other professions that use shadow abilities. As long as the body is in the shadow dancer can use shadow energy to confuse the enemy's sight. Under any circumstances, the shadow dancer can activate the stealth skill, also in battle. Even if the shadow dancer is exposed to the enemy's eyes, the shadow dancer can let himself successfully escape into the shadows and disappear from the enemy's sight out of thin air. Level 1 is once a day. There was also a limit to the rogue's stealth ability. It was impossible to directly disappear from the enemy's sight. Stealth was a process of merging oneself into the shadows. This process involved the ubiquitous shadow energy. There were only two kinds of advanced rogues that could disappear in front of your eyes in broad daylight. One was the lurker who mastered evade sight, and the other was the shadow dancer who mastered evade sight. The former directly disappeared into the shadow plane, and the latter used shadow energy to confuse your sight. The lurker was no longer in the material plane in this second of escaping into the shadows. He would temporarily enter the shadow plane and then come back. When he came back, he would have been completely integrated into the shadow energy. The shadow dancer used shadow energy to confuse your sight in the second. Although you couldn't see his existence, the shadow dancer was still in front of you, and you could still attack him. The shadow dancer profession has been upgraded to level 2. Received 25, DX 20 plus, INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0, 5, skill points, HP increased by 13, profession HP 8 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0, 5. Advanced profession talent comprehension. You have comprehended the profession talent, dark vision. The half-elf night vision ability has been superimposed. The total rogue profession level is 9, level 7 thief, level 2 shadow dancer. You have received an additional ability point. 1 rogue level increased his HP by 11 points, and 2 shadow dancer levels increased his HP by 26 points. As an advanced combat type profession, the shadow dancer had a strong evasion ability, which could improve the efficiency of mastering evasion abilities. At the same time, the profession level was also 2 points higher than the rogue. The basic HP of the rogue was 6, and the basic HP of the shadow dancer was 8. It was the same as the basic HP of most agility-based warriors. Abilities had to be trained or obtained by relying on ability points, but profession talents were abilities that could be mastered directly. Talents, as the name implied, were innate abilities. Many talents were special abilities that did not require ability points to master. Talents were basically brought about by advanced professions and innate bloodlines. A total of 37 HP increased. Soren directly recovered a lot from his seriously injured state. His vision had been restored. Although his ears were still bleeding, he could gradually hear. His internal organs that were affected by some kind of supernatural sound wave power quickly recovered. His body that was seriously injured by Vivian's attack had completely recovered. His eyes locked on the elven ranger in front of him, and he did not hesitate to upgrade the shadow dancer to level 2. In the case of a secondary profession, the secondary profession only counted half of the profession level. Level 7 Thief, Level 2 Advanced Shadow Dancer. Soren's rogue level was 9 in total. His secondary profession level 5 Wizard only counted half of the level bonus, so his total profession level was about 12. 3 profession levels could bring 1 ability point. When the total profession level was above 10 and entered grade 3, each advancement would also give an additional ability point. Soren directly gave up on upgrading other abilities, including Danger Sense, Reflex Evasion Proficiency, Summon Shadow, and other powerful abilities. He put all his ability points into the Grasp of Shadows ability. Spend 1 ability point. Profession ability, Grasp of Shadows, upgraded to Shadow Manipulation. Spend 1 ability point. Profession ability, Shadow Manipulation, upgraded to Shadow Weaving. Prerequisite met. Sneak 150, achieved. Shadow Weaving, achieved. Advanced Shadow Dancer, achieved. You have mastered the advanced ability of the Shadow Dancer, Shadow Jump. Soren leveled up 3 times in a row. He gave up the combat skills of the Shadow Dancer, and also gave up the precious opportunity to directly master Danger Sense, and also gave up the additional spell-like ability of Summon Shadow. He almost gave up most of his core abilities in order to master Shadow Jump in advance. 1/. Soren used Shadow Jump to kill the Elven Ranger in front of him with 1/. Danger Sense, supernatural ability. Your perception will predict all attacks, whether it is a magic attack or a physical attack. Any attack against you will inevitably trigger a perception test. If you pass the perceptive sense test, you will be able to predict all attacks aimed at you in advance, including directional spells. You will gain additional perceptive sense ability to dodge all attacks. Note, this supernatural ability can be stacked with the supernatural talent of the super strong sixth sense. Shadow Jump, supernatural ability. You completely assimilate yourself into the shadows and transform into a shadow life form when activating Shadow Jump. In the state of Shadow Jump, any shadow within 100 meters can be used as a landing point for you to jump across planes. This supernatural ability is equivalent to a 100-meter blink teleportation spell. It can only be used when you are in stealth mode and in the shadows. This ability cannot be used to jump across planes to places without shadows. Note, this is the prerequisite ability of the legendary skill, Shadow Step. It can only be used once per day. Chapter 118. He died just like that? Everyone present was a little sluggish, especially the hunters who had just chased the Elven Ranger for half a day. As one of the Sons of Fear, even without counting the ability brought by the divine power of fear, the Elven Ranger was still a grade 4 profession. A ranger with a profession level of 15 or above was not so easy to kill. In their view, Soren was at most a grade 3 rogue, and his profession level was not necessarily level 10. But the moment when he broke out was beyond everyone's imagination, especially the ability to suddenly appear in the opponent's shadow. It was definitely possible for a high-grade rogue to do that. This was the power of advanced professions, to give up part of the ability to pursue the limit of a certain ability. Soren's comprehensive strength was certainly not comparable to a high-grade rogue, but after advancing into a shadow dancer, his lethality could directly kill a high-grade enemy that was 5 levels higher. Assassins used poison, lurkers used shadow escape, and shadow dancers relied on shadow jump that they had mastered in advance. Soren was most proficient in lurker. 1 second of shadow escape could allow him to avoid many fatal spells. He advanced into a lurker largely because he encountered many enemies with powerful spells. As long as it was a spell that could not attack across planes, lurkers could use shadow escape to avoid it. Among all advanced rogues, only shadow dancers had the lowest requirement to master shadow jump. Even if lurkers wanted to use shadow jump, they would need more than 200 points of sneak, but lurkers could master the legendary ability, Shadow Realm, in advance. The level requirement for them to open the passage to the shadow plane was about 2 levels lower than other rogue professions. The time advanced to the 3rd second. Soren pulled out his curved sword and kicked the elven ranger's body down. Gloria had just recovered from her injuries, and her face was still very pale. The hunter's expressions changed from shock to anger because with the death of the elven ranger under Soren's sword, their ritual to the god of hunting had completely failed. The gnoll stared at him fiercely, and then his eyes fell on Vivian next to him. Since a son of fear had died, another could only replace it. Time continued to advance by 1 second. Vivian's small body was strangely suspended in the air. Her expression was very blank, and her cute little face was pale. Suddenly, her brows furrowed tightly, and her expression became somewhat pained. The elf ranger was dead. Soren had absorbed all of his divinity, which gave him 3 divinity points in advance. However, Soren had no way of absorbing the divine power of fear that the Dread Lord had bestowed upon the Son of God. The power of the gods had great limitations. This was a power that was beyond the control of mortals. If one didn't have a divinity or a corresponding domain of divinity, then no one would be able to obtain this divine power. This was because it would reject one's body, and in the end, it could directly kill one. Soren was not the son of fear. He couldn't absorb the power that the Dread Lord left in his son's body, but this power wouldn't disappear into thin air. At the moment of the Elven Ranger's death, this power of fear began to shift, and its target was naturally Vivian, who had just awakened. The little girl showed a pained expression. She held her head with her small hands, and her whole body trembled slightly. As an 8-year-old girl with a profession level less than grade 2, she couldn't instantly integrate the power of 2 sons of fear. Moreover, judging from the Elven Ranger who just cast fear, he must have a lot of divine power of fear. He must be one of the more powerful sons of fear to be able to trigger the test of death effect and scare so many grade 2 and above enemies to death. If he was given a little more time, he could even grow into an existence that could compete for the throne of the Dread Lord in the future. A powerful divine power broke out. Vivian's body actually glowed, and the Elven Ranger's body quickly lost its vitality. It was an indescribable feeling. He had just died, but it seemed that he had been dead for a long time, even if his body hadn't begun to rot. The little girl's expression became more and more painful, and then she suddenly fainted with a scream, and her figure fell directly from the sky. Gloria opened her hands to catch her, but because she was very weak after being injured, she also fell to the ground. The physique of a witch was definitely not as good as that of a melee profession. Just now, even her protective spell had been activated. Perhaps her injury had reached the level of serious injury or even higher. Soren rushed over in an instant, holding his curved sword in front of the two. "Take her away." His expression was a little determined, and his face was unusually gloomy. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Use the teleportation spell. Go now, and I'll cover you." The explosion of shadow jump couldn't be used casually. If one hadn't entered the legendary realm, using this ability would be like the barbarian's berserk talent. The body would consume a lot of energy when traveling through the shadow plane, and the whole person would also enter a state of fatigue directly after using it. Basically, all supernatural abilities were like this. After berserk, the barbarian would also be very weak. Soren was not a legendary rogue yet. His body still couldn't adapt to the backlash caused by the plane travel. After all, This was a supernatural spell-like ability, not a real teleportation spell of a wizard. In the case of a powerful explosion, he also had to pay a higher price, unless he mastered the legendary skill, Shadow Realm. Gloria's expression was very complicated. She looked at the many enemies in front of her. Although the followers of Mailer had suffered heavy casualties, there were at least a dozen hunters who were close to grade 4. These were all enemies with a profession level of 10 and above, and a few of them seemed to be dangerous characters with a profession level of 15. Soren couldn't be a match for these people at all. Not to mention that he had just used an explosive ability. Even if he was at his peak, it would be impossible for him to deal with so many enemies. Go! Soren's expression was ferocious. He roared at her and roared, retreat to the back of the valley, you used the teleportation spell to take Vivian away. I have a way to stop them. The light of a spell appeared. The legendary elemental stone was activated by Soren. As the rocks and soil on the ground rolled, the ground in front of him directly connected to the elemental plane, and then he summoned and constructed a grade 4 earth elemental. The summoned earth elemental was not an advanced one. Soren directly controlled it through his will, and at the same time, he made it block in front of the three of them. A grade 4 earth elemental. Its HP was close to 300 points. Soren would need to slash at it dozens of times to kill it, but it was enough to hold on for a while. Gloria's expression was complicated. There was a hint of struggle in her eyes, but in the end, she gritted her teeth and began to cast spells quickly. Northern witches were not shy girls. Women who could grow up to become high-grade spellcasters were not simple. She naturally knew the price Soren had to pay for staying behind to block them, but if she wasted this precious time, the three of them would all die here. A high-grade wizard would always leave a way out for herself. She had already left a teleportation mark in a safe place before she set off. Soren didn't have time to talk nonsense. He clenched his curved sword and rushed forward, leaving Gloria with only a resolute back view. The earth elemental could stop the ordinary enemies, but it couldn't stop the high-grade professions. He had to fight for 30 seconds. A long-distance teleportation spell needed at least 30 seconds to cast. During this time, she couldn't be attacked, or else she might be planning to cast the spell. The enemies in front of him reacted quickly. The first one to rush over was the black knoll. It roared, and its muscles swelled. Its veins twisted like earthworms. This was the monster's wild and violent ability. It didn't have any profession requirements. The battle couldn't be fought near Gloria, or else the enemy would directly throw a weapon at her and interrupt her casting. Soren controlled the earth elemental to block in front of him like a wall. He then jumped up and directly faced the knoll hunter in front of him. Clang! A harsh collision sound was heard. Soren's figure fell back, and a trace of blood flowed out of his mouth. 5 seconds had passed. The high-grade hunters sprinted for hundreds of meters and were already in front of them. Clang! 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 Soren's arm was scratched by the sharp claws, and a piece of flesh was torn off. The protective energy of stone skin was still there, but it couldn't stop the enemy's attack. It was a hunter with a profession level of 15 or above. The earth elemental blocked in front of the enemies, waving its thick stone arms to force them away. However, there were still some who went around from the side. These high-grade professions could easily jump on roofs and run on walls. The heavy and slow earth elemental couldn't stop so many people. Swoosh! Soren directly threw his curved sword, and it hit the back of an enemy in an instant. The enemy staggered and fell to the ground. The moment he rolled to avoid the attack, 2 daggers appeared in his hands. Clang! 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 15 seconds later, a tall and majestic hybrid orc warrior rushed up. It only took one swing of its axe to make a dent in the earth elemental's arm. A 4th-grade creature couldn't win against a 4th-grade profession. The difference in combat skills between the two was too big. Soren opened up the distance between them, and then pointed his finger forward. 2 arcane missiles were shot out. The hybrid orc blocked the attack with its weapon, but it suddenly screamed. An energy beam hit its eye socket. The energy ring. Soren waited until now to use this precious item. 25 seconds had passed. A mixed blood orc rushed over from the side along the mountain wall and threw his weapon out. There was a muffled sound in the air. Gloria's energy protective force field was still there, but it was already showing signs of breaking. The energy barrier couldn't withstand the attacks of these tier 3 and above enemies, and they could break it within 3 moves if they tried to close the distance between them. 30 seconds had passed. Gloria completed the teleportation spell. The low-grade anywhere door could only teleport a short distance. If she wanted to leave safely, she had to teleport more than 100 miles away. Otherwise, she would be found by the enemy before she could recover her combat power. The hunter's tracking ability was stronger than the ranger's. She didn't even have time to memorize the spell again. A teleportation door opened. Gloria gritted her teeth and carried Vivian into the teleportation door. The enemies nearby were already 50 meters away. Before entering, she looked back at Soren and saw his back covered in blood. There were 5 claw marks on his back, but he was still standing like a rock. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt very sad. A trace of moisture appeared in the corner of her eyes, and finally, it turned into a drop of something called a tear that she didn't know. As a high and mighty northern witch, this was the first time she had felt such a strong sense of powerlessness. If one was not a legendary being, it would be impossible to fight against so many enemies. Even a wizard couldn't do it. As Gloria stepped into the teleportation door with Vivian in her arms, the surrounding hunters suddenly roared in anger. The gnolls' eyes were bloodshot. They howled and rushed toward them like crazy. Soren's face was a little twisted. Because of fatigue and pain, his injuries were not light. Facing the enemies surrounding him from all directions, he smiled ferociously and murmured as if he was a little crazy, "I've been through so many storms and waves, and I've killed 3 times in the abyss. I don't believe I'll die in the hands of these trash who aren't even legendary. Goddess of luck. Take care of me this time. I'll definitely repay you in the future. I'll definitely be on your side in the Battle of the Titans." He suddenly took a deep breath. Then, he used all his strength to jump out and forcibly broke out of the enemy's encirclement. He ran toward the other side of the cliff that was hundreds of meters high. After using his last burst of strength to open up the distance, he suddenly disappeared from the enemy's sight. Of the 2 shadow dancers, the last one was evade sight. Soren entered stealth. Chapter 119. The piercing cold wind was howling. On a wizard tower erected by the lakeside, a faint light suddenly appeared. The cold wind rolled up the snowflakes, but when they reached the surroundings of the wizard tower, they strangely disappeared. The snowflakes seemed to have hit an invisible barrier and fell lightly on the ground. On the 12th floor of the wizard tower, a portal made of a large number of gems and secret materials appeared with a light, and then Gloria appeared with Vivian in her arms. Wizards would set the location of long-distance teleportation to the safest place, and the most likely place was the wizard tower they controlled. The heavy steel golem stepped in and lowered its head to Gloria in front of it. "Dear Master, I'm sorry to disturb you. Is there anything you need?" Its voice was like the friction of metal. It used soul fragments as imprints, which gave it a certain degree of intelligence. This was a higher-level golem, and it could carry out some simple orders. Gloria glanced at it expressionlessly. A wizard who was prepared was unmatched. Even if she faced hundreds of hunters with her real strength, she was not powerless. However, too much of her power was in the wizard tower. In this wizard tower, there were 12 level 15 steel golems, and 36 level 10 clay golems and stone golems. Some of the powerful magic devices could not be shrunk to be carried around. In addition to the usual staff and scrolls, high-grade wizards would at most carry some protective equipment. Without the protection of the golem army, even high-grade adepts would not have the time to cast spells. Energy shields alone would not be enough to stop a large group of enemies. Gloria gently put Vivian on the bed. She raised her hand and stroked the little girl's pale face. She seemed to be a little uneasy. Vivian seemed to be unable to bear such a powerful divine power. The power of the Son of God was awakened step by step. Vivian had just become a wizard, and she had absorbed such a huge amount of divine power. The result was unpredictable. The Elven Ranger's divine power had obviously been transferred to her. The combined power of two children of God was at least at the legendary level. An 8-year-old girl might not be able to fuse them. No matter how powerful the bloodline was, it would still take time to fuse with it. The bloodline of the dragons was considered to be the best in the various planes, but young dragons were considered to be very fragile creatures. Vivian was like a baby dragon. When she was still in her infancy, her body had been injected with the power of an adult dragon or even an ancient dragon. If she couldn't control this power, she would either go mad or die. Gloria's fingertips glowed with a magical aura. After confirming that Vivian was only temporarily unconscious and not in any life-threatening danger, she walked towards the top of the wizard tower. She was going to perform a divination ritual. In the biting cold wind, Gloria walked to the top of the wizard tower, where there was an ancient astrology platform. This tower had been passed down for many years among the northern witches, and she was the new master. The northern witches had the talent for divination spells. Many of them were not wizards who specialized in divination spells, but they had an ancient inheritance in divination. Gloria took off the veil on her face, revealing a face that could topple countries. The wizard robe on her body was fluttering in the cold wind. The northern lands were always cold like knives. She knelt in front of the astrology platform and took out a set of delicate cards from her sleeve. There were mysterious runes on them. There was a price to pay for divination. Witches who often used divination spells or prophecy spells would have a shorter lifespan than other witches. This was because even witches rarely took the initiative to perform divination for others. She knew that the hope was slim. However, Gloria still wanted to know if Soren had survived. She hoped that he could survive. Whether it was divination or prophecy, the accuracy rate was not as high as one would expect. In order to obtain a sufficiently accurate divination, one had to pay a corresponding price. The most common price was one's lifespan. Gloria slowly closed her eyes. Her fingers shuffled the cards at an amazing speed, and the runes emitted a faint light. In the end, when she opened her palm, all the cards were suspended in the air on the astrology platform, emitting a sparkling magical aura. She still did not open her eyes. She just stretched out her hand and pulled out one card, then the second, and finally the third. The other cards fell to the ground, and she covered 3 cards in the center of the astrology platform. Gloria gently opened her eyes. Her expression seemed to be hesitating, but in the end, she slowly opened the cards. She was a little worried that she had foreseen something bad. The first card was opened, and it was a ferocious little devil. This was a demon from hell. Gloria's face was slightly pale because this could mean that Soren had died. His soul had been sent to hell and then turned into a demon. Of course, it could also mean something else. Because the northern witch's divination could only know the final answer after looking at all the cards. The second card was opened, and it was a big tree that almost covered the sky. This was the legendary tree of life, and it was also the divine tree that the elves believed in and lived in. Gloria's face regained a trace of color, and her expression seemed to be a little surprised. She couldn't wait to flip open the third card, but this card made her silent, because it was a big ghost card. This was the card that appeared the least in the northern witch's divination. The small ghost was engraved with the lowest class of demons, while the big ghost was engraved with a handsome face. He had dark skin and hair, and his pupils were flashing with the color of hell. He also had a pair of dark red horns on his head. This devil's clothes were rather extravagant. The colors were mainly red and black, and there were extremely complicated patterns on it. He held a ruby scepter in his hand and stood in front of the throne, looking down at everything with a high and mighty gaze, as if he was looking at the so-called living beings in the plane. This was the big devil. The legendary lord of the 9 hells, Asmodeus. The most powerful ancient demon in history had existed for countless years, and it was possible that he would continue to exist for countless more years. This was a card that represented many meanings, but it was definitely not a simple card when it appeared. Anyone who had a big devil in their divination would definitely not have an ordinary life. The little devil was one of the more common cards, but the big devil had only appeared a few times in the Northern Witch's divination. The last card was actually the big devil that represented the Lord of Hell. This was even more surprising to her than the big devil in the first card. For a moment, even Gloria couldn't determine whether Soren was alive or dead. For a high-grade Northern Witch to draw big and small devils at the same time in a divination ceremony, his fate was difficult to be determined by divination spells. This meant that even a legendary divination spell couldn't determine whether Soren was alive or dead. Gloria stood up with a complicated expression. Suddenly, she staggered and almost fell on the astrology platform. A deep sense of powerlessness enveloped her body. In a trance, the scene around her completely disappeared. She seemed to see endless illusions, and endless blood and fire burning. When she looked up, she saw the shadow of a goat's skull, and its pupils were burning with faint flames. The illusion only lasted for a short time. When she recovered from the backlash of the divination spell, she was already standing at the edge of the wizard tower. If she took one more step, she would fall from the wizard tower that was hundreds of meters high. The biting cold wind was still whistling. Her wizard robe was soaked, and there seemed to be a bone-chilling cold all over her body. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. When she turned to look at the astrology platform, the card that represented the big devil had already burned and turned into ashes in the faint flames. The other two cards were still intact, but that one dissipated in the cold wind. The will of hell? Gloria suddenly trembled all over and murmured, could it be that the big ghost doesn't mean anything else? Does it really mean the Lord of Hell? She seemed to have felt something. Gloria suddenly reached out and stroked her long hair. She didn't know when, but there were a few more silver strands in her hair. Chapter 120. Soren's figure disappeared into thin air in front of the hunter's eyes. It didn't even blink in the middle of the day, and Soren just disappeared like that. The natives of this world rarely encountered advanced professions because they were as rare as spellcasters. Out of 100 advanced professions, at least 90% of them were warriors, and only 1% of them were spellcasters or special advanced professions. Warriors were always the mainstream professions because any race or creature could advance into a warrior. Warriors were the only professions that could be chosen by any race. The Dark Knoll couldn't tell what ability Soren had used, but it was sure that he had entered stealth. It was no doubt that it was afraid of him. If Soren fought back with all his might, his life would be in danger. The Knoll wasn't sure if it could dodge the supernatural ability that came out of nowhere from the shadow behind it. So it hesitated for a moment, and only moved forward when the others nearby were close enough. It stopped at the place where Soren had disappeared for a moment, and sniffed the blood on the ground. Soren was heavily injured, and the Knoll could track him based on the smell of blood. Soren's tracks were faint, but there were drops of blood from time to time, which was the most obvious trace. 150 points of stealth. Soren had completely blended into the shadows, and no one could see him with the naked eye. He had chosen a backlit position, and the moment he rushed out, he entered stealth and disappeared from everyone's sight. Although stealth couldn't be seen with the naked eye, there were still traces left behind. Soren didn't dare to stop for even a moment, and quickly moved in the shadows. The Knoll couldn't see him with the naked eye, and if they only relied on smell and blood to track him, they wouldn't be able to find him so quickly. The regeneration effect of his 20 points of constitution had begun to take effect, and the wounds on Soren's body gradually stopped bleeding. The hunters' shouts came from behind, and under the Knoll's command, the other hunters immediately spread out. Soren didn't dare to move in a way that was too obvious, because it would completely expose his position. He moved along the hard ground at a decent speed, which would make the footprints he left behind very inconspicuous. Sprinting away at high speed was impossible. His physical strength was not as good as these hunters because he was still injured. If he exposed his position, the enemy would soon catch up with him. At that time, there would be no way out. Hunters with a profession level of 15 and above basically had one of their main attributes that was close to the realm of extraordinary. As high-grade professions below the legendary realm, they were completely different from the enemies Soren had faced before. While moving forward, Soren was also trying to figure out the best escape route. Hiding in the forest was definitely out of the question. High-tier jackalans were too good at tracking. As long as the smell of blood was still there, it was only a matter of time before it found him. If he wanted to escape, he would have to take some risks. He had made a crazy decision. In fact, when he activated evade sight, he had already made a crazy decision. In front of Soren was a cliff that was hundreds of meters high. This was a natural fault near the forest. There were lush trees below, and a small river could be vaguely seen in the distance. If he jumped from such a high place, he would definitely die. Even if he had 25 points of constitution, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. The damage from falling from such a high place was too great, and the probability of a legendary profession surviving was not very high. Of course, Soren wouldn't be so stupid as to jump down and pray that he would be fine. Perhaps even the goddess of luck couldn't do anything about it. He had never been a person who liked to gamble on his luck. Even if he wanted to gamble on his luck, he had to make sure that he had a certain degree of confidence. Soren quickly found his target. His expression was a little ferocious. Perhaps it was because it was too risky, and his calmness couldn't control his gradually accelerating heartbeat. Soren gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. Then he took out a hook from his multidimensional bag. It was the tool he used to climb over the wall of Whiterun. He took a deep look at the bottom of the cliff. About 100 meters above the ground, there was a small fault. There were protruding rocks nearby, and there was also a tree that wasn't very thick-rooted nearby. He silently calculated the position and tied the cloak on his back. It looked like the simplest parachute that could be opened after jumping down to reduce the speed of falling. He held the hook in his hand, the hook in his right hand, and the rope in his left hand that was about 20 to 30 meters long. After Soren took a deep breath, he suddenly jumped down from the cliff that was hundreds of meters high. The biting cold wind blew as he fell through the air. The scenery in front of Soren's eyes was falling at a crazy speed. He pushed his extraordinary agility and balance to the limit. The cloak slightly reduced his speed, but he was still falling rapidly. He tried his best to keep his eyes open and locked onto his target. After falling about 300 meters, Soren threw the hook in his hand. Life and death were decided in this instant. The next moment, the hook lock hit the tree trunk and wrapped around it 3 times. The hook was fixed between the branches of the tree trunk. The rope that Soren threw out straightened and tightened rapidly. Under the strong force of the fall, the rope was also pulled out of his palm quickly. His palm had become a bloody mess. The hook that was fixed to the tree was pulled taut. The moment the hook was hit by the force of the fall, Soren's hand that was holding onto the rope loosened a little. If he didn't reduce his strength at all, the rope might break directly. This process only took 2 seconds and lasted for 20 meters. Soren's hand that was holding onto the rope slowly moved down, allowing the rope to break free from his hand. At the same time, he used a perfect amount of force to counteract the force of the fall. The friction caused by the rapid fall made his palm bleed. His skin and flesh were stuck to the rope, and his bones could be vaguely seen. 20 meters was enough to counteract most of the force of the fall. When the rope in his hand was rapidly reduced to less than 2 or 3 meters in length, Soren suddenly wrapped his arm around the rope, and then the remaining strength burst out at this moment. The rope instantly sank, and the tree branch above it shook a little. The recoil caused Soren's falling speed to suddenly stop, and he even flew up a little. The tree branch was able to withstand the force of the fall. The rope was also able to reduce the force of the fall due to the friction, and it didn't break immediately. Soren's body rebounded for 3 to 5 meters due to the deformation of the tree branch, and he fell down a little more. However, the force of the fall was already very weak. He successfully counteracted the force of the fall and stabilized himself in midair. He was about 100 meters away from the ground, and if he jumped from this height, he would still die. Soren panted a little to recover his strength. He allowed his injured arm to recover from the force of the fall, and drank a healing potion at the same time. Then, he began to shake the rope lightly, and the swaying gradually became stronger. Finally, he hit a rock on the cliff. Clang! A dagger with a cold gleam pierced into the rock. Soren's swaying body immediately stabilized in front of the cliff. He looked at the steep cliff and stepped on a protruding rock. Then, he clenched his teeth and used his other bloody hand to pull out a second dagger, and stabbed it into a spot next to him. Phew! Soren let out a long breath, and then slowly took a deep breath. He untied the rope on his body and stepped on a protruding rock that was less than 3 centimeters wide. Then, he used the force of the dagger to slowly climb down the cliff. Clang! Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The dagger in Soren's hand was very close to breaking. However, he had already climbed tens of meters, and the protruding rocks were increasing. His speed was also increasing. There were some places where he could directly climb down, but when there was no place to borrow force, he would use the dagger to open a path. He relied on his explosive strength and the support of his 20 points of physique. He used the sword form, heavy hack, to stab the dagger into the cliff to absorb the force of the fall. He was getting closer and closer to the ground. When he was about 30 meters away from the cliff, Soren directly slid down the cliff. The friction from the fall made his injuries worse, but when he was about 10 meters away, he directly jumped down from a height of about 3 stories. Bang! Soren knelt down on one knee to reduce the force of the fall. His bones felt like they were about to fall apart, and his injuries were all over his body. He only had a quarter of his HP left. The accumulated bruises were actually close to 30 points. If it wasn't for his physique, he would have already lost all his strength. On the cliff. The figures of the hunters appeared at the edge of the cliff. The moment Soren jumped down the cliff, they had already discovered his tracks, and in the next moment, they would forever remember this crazy enemy. After Soren landed, he raised his head and looked at them. His face was a little ferocious. Suddenly, he laughed crazily, and in the end, it turned into a crazy laugh. His body was covered with wounds. His palms were already showing some white bones, and his back was a mess of flesh and blood. His injuries made him look like a demon, but he was definitely crazier than them. I knew I wouldn't die here. Soren looked at the cliff that was hundreds of meters high with a murderous gaze, and then ran away without looking back. One day, he would take back what he had lost today. Chapter 121. Beside a clear river. Traces of blood spread along the river. Soren's expression was grim as he cleaned the wounds on his body. Then he gritted his teeth and used a needle and thread to sew up the cut flesh. Once he put some distance between them, it would be impossible for them to catch up with him. The stealth ability of a rogue was no joke. If they wanted to track a rogue like him in the wilderness, they would need a legendary level tracking profession. By the time they found a way to get down the cliff, Soren had already put more than 10 kilometers of distance between them and disappeared from their tracking range. After making sure that it was safe, Soren stopped to treat his wounds. The smell of blood on his body was too strong. Even if he got rid of the hunters, he might attract other beasts. The wilderness was full of creatures that were very sensitive to the smell of blood. Tisk! Soren bit off the needle and thread with his teeth and then looked at the wound on his arm. His face was very ugly. It was the first time in a long time that he was forced into such a miserable situation. He almost died there. The wounds on other parts of his body were better, but the wound on his back was more difficult. He couldn't sew the wound there. He could only apply some ointment and let the regeneration effect of his 20 points of constitution recover. Although the river was unusually cold in late autumn, he still went in to wash himself because there was too much blood on his body. Soren's face was a little pale when he got out of the river. Perhaps it was because he had lost a lot of blood. He took out some jerky and chewed it while using a level 0 spell to dry himself. The elemental stone in his arms had become a little dim because its power had been exhausted. It had to wait for 7 days to fully recover. This legendary level equipment could be said to have saved his life. It summoned the earth elemental to restrain a lot of enemies, and the stone skin spell had blocked at least 6 attacks for him. The curved sword had been thrown out to attack the enemies, and Soren only had 2 daggers in his hands that were close to being scrapped. He didn't recklessly look for the hunters for revenge. Instead, he moved further away. First, he had to rest for a night to recover. On the one hand, he had to heal his wounds, and on the other hand, he had to restore his energy. Spell-like abilities were bloodline abilities. As long as he had a good night's sleep, he could use shadow jump and evade sight again tomorrow. Equipment was very important. Soren needed to find a weapon and recharge the equipment he had used. For example, if he had enough alchemy skills, he could recharge the ring by himself. As for the safety of Gloria and Vivian, Soren wasn't too worried. With the wisdom of the high-grade northern witches, they definitely wouldn't use short-distance teleportation. Low-level blink spells were useless. They could only temporarily avoid attacks. The teleportation portal was too short. Even if they escaped, they would be tracked by the enemy. Gloria had opened a long-distance teleportation portal. If he wasn't mistaken, it should be her wizard tower. Vivian was safe there for the time being, and Soren could look for her after he recovered from his injuries. The North and the Frost Kingdom were separated by hundreds of miles of glacial mountains. It was difficult for ordinary people to cross, but it was much easier for him to cross alone. Because he could also learn spells. Fly was a level 3 spell. Soren could now learn it. Although the duration was only 1 point for 1 minute, it was enough for him to fly a long distance. In this world, the pursuit of fly was not very high. Generally, teleportation was used for long distances. Except for some advanced alchemy devices during the Arcane Empire, the fastest creature to fly should be the dragon. Only when there was a need would there be a pursuit. The birth of teleportation made too many spellcasters focus on the study of the space dimension. Some supernatural environments were dangerous to fly in. After a short rest, Soren began to walk along the river. It was easy to gather near a water source. He'd better find an elven village first. The injury on his back couldn't be delayed. If possible, he needed to find a priest to treat it. Otherwise, it would take at least 3 or 4 days to recover. Maybe it was because he had been injured too often. Soren's heal skill had risen quickly. It had reached 27 points in heal. If it rose further, he would be at the level of a professional doctor in town who was responsible for treating sword wounds. Along the way, he didn't stop at all. When he saw the road ahead, he knew he was close to the gathering place of the elves. Sure enough, soon there was a field of farmland. Farming required fertile land and sufficient water. Most intelligent creatures would choose to cultivate the better land. Before arriving at the village, Soren met an elven patrol. All of them were archers, wearing exquisite leather armor, and were equipped with long swords, short swords, and other weapons. The elves rarely used heavy weapons. The captain stopped Soren and asked him. He carefully looked at Soren, then warned him not to cause trouble and let him go. It was easy for humans to move around. If there were orcs or gnolls, they would probably just catch them. After entering the village, Soren immediately went to the elven temple. It was a temple of the goddess of life. The current goddess of life was the second wife of the elven guardian. She was in charge of the priesthood of spring, fertility, birth, planting, and so on. The oldest goddess of life had disappeared for a long time. No one knew if she had fallen or not. The priesthood of life was now divided among many gods. Currently, most of the priesthoods with the symbol of the goddess of life were in a certain field. For example, the goddess of life of the elves, the goddess of life of the halflings, and so on. Unless someone took away most of the priesthood of life, then they could become the real goddess of life. There was nothing much to say about this goddess of life. It was worth mentioning that the former elven goddess of life was the legendary Queen of Spiders, the first wife of the elven patron god, and now the Lord God served by the drows in the Underdark. She was also the most powerful, evil, and cunning abyss demon god. No one expected that the first Queen of Spiders would fall so low and become one of the most powerful demons of the Chaos Evil faction. Perhaps it was because of her existence that others had a deeper understanding of the depravity of the gods. In fact, Soren admired the Queen of Spiders because she was really, really powerful. During the time of troubles, many gods had fallen or lost a lot of power. Only the Queen of Spiders had become the demon closest to the dominator level in the abyss. In just 5 years, she had risen from a mid-level divine power to a great divine power. She was even close to becoming a greater divine power. If she had not had so many enemies, she might have been able to become a greater divine power god. In other words, she could create a world out of thin air. The standard to measure a greater divine power was vague. The easiest way to understand was to say, God said let there be light, so there was light. This was the standard of a greater divine power. So far, there had not been any greater divine power gods. Some of the ancient gods with greater divine power had already fallen. At most, the current gods had opened up a divine kingdom in a certain plane. The standard of the temple was one level lower than the temple. There were very few priests with a profession level of 10 and above. The one in charge of receiving Soren was a middle-aged male elf. He looked more elegant and was probably a priest around level 8. The main way priests made money was to treat injuries and then sell various healing potions. The temple needed money to maintain, expand faith, and improve power. The priests of the goddess of wealth even became professional merchants. Most temples sold healing magic to the outside world, and it was the kind that clearly marked the price and refused to be haggled. Soren bought a healing medium injury potion at a shocking price of 200 Kindler coins. The cost and expense of healing magic were destined to be difficult to popularize. Ordinary people mainly relied on medicine and doctors for treatment. The effect of the magic was amazing. Soren recovered quickly after the priest cast the magic. The wound on his back gradually healed, and only a shallow red mark could be seen. After buying 2 bottles of healing potions, he walked out of the elven temple. Then, he saw a team of well-equipped elven guards escorting a handsome elven noble on a white horse. The elves were naturally not equal. Ordinary elves were similar to ordinary human civilians. It was a male elf with long green hair. Needless to say, his bloodline was undoubtedly quite noble because the nearby elves slightly bowed their heads when they saw him. Soren also noticed the elven noble. After seeing some characteristics, the corner of his mouth could not help but show a strange smile. It seemed that the elven noble in front of him was the descendant of the goddess of life. Of course, he was not the first generation of the Son of God. It should be a divine bloodline that had been passed down for many years. His talent was only much stronger than ordinary people, but not at the level of the Son of Fear. The elven guards escorted him to the Temple of Life. Soren quickly stepped aside to let them pass. The elven guard looked at him with surprise because there were not many human adventurers in the forest, and there were even fewer rogues who were alone. Speaking of which, the elven lord was really difficult to evaluate. As the patron of the elves, his first wife fell into the abyss and became the goddess of spiders. Basically, he could do whatever he wanted. Many people knew the character of the Queen of Spiders. Just look at how licentious the drows were. There were also some secret rumors about his second wife. It was said that she once had a child with a mortal, and it was some time after she became the goddess of life. Of course, the official statement was that the mortal was originally the incarnation of the elven lord. In fact, it was just a couple playing around. But no one knew the real situation. However, according to legend, the elven lord was a hermaphrodite. In the past, his incarnation would sometimes be female, and he would have some stories with some outstanding mortal males. So maybe he really did not care much about these things. The elven noble in front of him should be the descendant of the goddess of life. Although it was not clear who the Queen of Elves had a child with, Soren felt that it was definitely not the child of the elven lord. because the bloodline of two gods could not still be in the mortal world. The probability of that kind of child being born as a god was too low. Chapter 122. It was not easy to evaluate the descendants of the divine blood. Because strictly speaking, Gloria was also a descendant of the divine blood, because the predecessor of the Northern Witches was split from a powerful organization. This organization had existed for a long time, and their leader was even a chosen of the goddess of magic. During that time, many powerful witches were born in the north, some of which were even comparable to the gods. That era was too long ago. Only the oldest ruins and documents had records of the chosen one of the north. Gloria, as the purest northern witch, would more or less have a trace of the bloodline inheritance. This bloodline was similar to the elven noble in front of him. Some could strengthen their own talents, and some had basically exhausted their power. It was like the god of slaughter had fallen for a long time, but many of his descendants, the former sons of slaughter, had survived the catastrophe of slaughter. These descendants reproduced generation after generation, and in the end, they were basically no different from ordinary people. Occasionally, there would be some people with more amazing talents, but their bloodline was thin to the point of 1 in 10 million. In fact, there were many such people. Therefore, most of the bloodline of the sons of God referred to within 3 generations. Beyond this range, they were not considered descendants of the divine blood. The elven noble in front of him did not even have a trace of divinity in his body, let alone divine power. At best, his bloodline talent was better than ordinary people, and his basic attributes were higher than ordinary people. This bloodline talent was roughly equivalent to the direct descendants of legendary professions, and it might even be inferior to the descendants of legendary professions. Once, there was a saying that the hero template had inherited the blood of massacre, so it could extract soul energy. Among the natives of this world, only a small number of very special existences could increase their strength through killing. These special existences were basically related to the domain of the massacre priesthood. However, this saying had never been verified. Soren did not pay much attention to the elven noble. He went straight to the inn, ready to rest for a day. This village was not small, and the population was large. According to this progress, it was only a matter of time before it developed into a town. Soren's half-elven bloodline was thin, and he looked like a human from the outside, so he did not receive any preferential treatment. These elves just regarded him as an adventurer, and their attitude was basically cold. Elves were not a race that was easy to get along with. It was the outside world that was curious about them, and then the bards beautified them. Soren even thought that the stubborn dwarves were easier to deal with than the elves. There was a weapons shop in the village. The blacksmith was a burly elf, and he didn't look elegant. He also held a hammer and hammered loudly, and he was wearing an apron. In this world, there was no such thing as a naturally elegant race. To eat, drink, and defecate, one had to farm. To live, one had to work. Similarly, the elves would use their excrement to fertilize the land. Some of the droll who believed in the way of the earth would even personally do some of the seemingly dirty labor, viewing it as a form of cultivation. Yes. The last one was influenced by the warrior monks, especially the ascetic monks among the warrior monks. Over the long years, a large number of paths of professionals had been produced. Things that remained unchanged would only gradually be eliminated. The droll order was now considered a relatively powerful spellcasters' organization. The enlightened faction among them had even accepted the elemental thought of shamanism. The elven village Soren was in was within the scope of the way of the earth. In the middle of the village, there was an ancient stone pillar. From this point of view, this world was still full of endless vitality. The burly elf blacksmith glanced at Soren. It was best not to underestimate the blacksmiths. They were firmly in the middle class, and it was also an area where professionals often advanced. Those who dared to cause trouble in a weapons shop would always regret it in the end. Of course, Soren wouldn't underestimate the blacksmith in front of him. He had been forging for more than 10 years, and he was basically a warrior. He nodded slightly and said, "I want to buy a high-quality curved sword. The price is not a problem. A curved sword? The burly elf blacksmith glanced at him, pulled out a curved sword from behind, and handed it to him. He said, "What do you think of this one?" Whiteboard. Soren didn't even need to look at it. He touched it and knew that it was a whiteboard equipment, and it was a little light. He shook his head in disappointment and said, "It's too light. I'm afraid that it won't be able to withstand the explosive power of battle. It might even damage the weapons used against gnolls." The elf blacksmith glanced at him again and said, "Then I don't have any better ones. I mainly make sickles and kitchen knives here. If not, I make longswords used by the patrol guards. If you want longswords, I have a few good ones here." Longswords used by the patrol guards? Soren thought for a while and realized that they were using fine craftsmanship. The blacksmith in front of him could make fine craftsmanship weapons? Basically, those who could make fine craftsmanship weapons could use some special materials to make rare grade 1 weapons. The craftsmanship of the elves was not bad. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to make 2 legendary curved swords in the Underdark. The blacksmith in front of him was obviously not a master, but he should be able to make a +1 curved sword, right? High-level blacksmiths were rare. It wasn't that their craftsmanship wasn't good enough, but the blacksmith masters were all high-level professionals. Among them, there were also wizards who studied alchemy. The one who had forged the legendary curved sword for Sauron was a level 15 ranger, level 3 Michaeli wanderer, and level 8 warlock. Not only that, he was also a quarter of the dragonborn bloodline. His family had once captured a shadow dragon. The shadow dragon wasn't the key. The key was that this shadow dragon was male, so the evil drows imprisoned it. They also used some kind of special transformation technique to turn it into a human. What happened next was needless to say. The drows couldn't do anything good. A group of female drows imprisoned it for a long time. Every day, they did some activities that were not suitable for children. In the end, they successfully gave birth to a large number of mixed-blood half-draconians. After the male shadow dragon escaped, he was about to go crazy. He risked his life to massacre the group of drows, but there were still some half-dragons who survived. The blacksmith who made the legendary curved sword for Soren was one of them. In order to make the curved sword, Soren was busy with a lot of things for him. He even killed one of the candidates for the matriarch of a family. The blacksmith in front of him naturally didn't have such high requirements. Soren looked at him and asked tentatively, "If I give you the materials, can you make a rare weapon?" "Huh?" The elven blacksmith looked at him, thought for a moment, and said in a deep voice, "It's definitely possible with the materials, but I don't know alchemy. There's no way to add elemental damage." That was enough. Soren didn't dare to ask for elemental damage. That kind of thing needed 100 or 200 points of alchemy to add. For him, he was satisfied to be able to make an ordinary +1 rare curved sword. There were a lot of third-rate blacksmiths. There were very few who could make military products, and even fewer who could use alchemy to enchant weapons. The dwarves boasted about their blacksmiths. When Soren went to the dwarves, he only saw a group of high-grade blacksmiths with 150 to 250 points of forging skill. Damn it, there was no one in the whole Forge Castle who could make a grade 3 legendary curved sword. Sure enough, the dwarves' words couldn't be trusted too much. These guys only knew how to brag when they drank, and their bragging wasn't reliable at all. The elven blacksmith in front of him looked like he was approaching middle age. At this age, he must have been blacksmithing for a long time. His forging skill should be above 200 points, and he should be able to make a grade 1 rare curved sword. Soren immediately said, "Tell me what materials you need. I'll get them for you as soon as possible." Grade 1 rare materials weren't that rare. He probably had some fine iron here, but he probably lacked some other things. 300 kindler. The elven blacksmith wasn't in a hurry. He first looked at Soren, then took out a rough piece of paper and wrote a row of things. "You just need to find a few things on this list. You can buy them from Priest Hierro." Soren reached out and took a look. The things on the list weren't that rare. They were worth around 200 kindler. Among them, Fluorite was the easiest to find. A custom-made weapon was twice as expensive as a second-hand weapon. 500 Kindler was still within Soren's acceptable range. So he didn't hesitate to agree. For a moment, he actually felt a little emotional. After coming to this world for so long, he could finally get his hands on a rare weapon. Although it was only a grade 1 weapon, he was already satisfied. At the very least, the customized curved sword could be made according to his standards, and it would definitely be more convenient than the military products he bought before. For a skillful rogue like him, the weapon must be the most suitable for him to use. Otherwise, it wouldn't be difficult to buy a +1 longsword, and it would be enough to spend a little more money. But the problem was that a 1.2-meter longsword was a long sword, and a 1.3-meter longsword was also a long sword. These guys were all called longswords, but the feeling of holding them in his hand was completely different. Rogues weren't as picky as warriors when it came to weapons. The skills of warriors determined that the requirements for weapons were greatly reduced. The deal was finalized. After the elven blacksmith got the deposit, he began to work. He needed to temper the fine iron first. Rare weapons were all made with the technique of 100-fold steel forging. The specialty of the elves' forging was that they could create small fish scale patterns when hammering. The dwarves' forging technique was high hardness, while the elves' forging technique was good toughness. The weapons they made weren't easy to break. Soren directly went to buy all the materials, basically without bargaining, and then sent them here. The elven blacksmith seemed to be very interested in forging rare weapons. He even started the furnace overnight, saying that the forging could be completed within 3 days. This was undoubtedly very good news. At that time, Soren's injuries were almost completely healed. P.S. Later, I will post the new curved sword model and the related works. After it passes the review, you should be able to see it. You guys are awesome. Futu will release more chapters tomorrow. Chapter 123. After the materials were ready, the elven blacksmith started working overnight. A sickle was worth 20 copper kindler, and a kitchen knife was worth 30 copper kindler. The long swords of the elven guards were considered military products, and they were only worth about a dozen kindler. The elven blacksmith could only earn 4 or 5 kindler for a high-quality military weapon, but he could earn about 100 kindler by forging a curved sword for Soren. The higher the grade of the weapon, the higher the value, and the higher the requirement for forging skills and materials. The forging was not very difficult. The elven blacksmith had prepared elven steel ingots, fish-scale steel, in advance. The key was the special material that cost 200 kindler, which was not something that ordinary people could afford. Only 1 or 2 people in the whole village were equipped with rare-grade weapons, and it would take an ordinary elven patrol guard 10 years to earn enough money. The forging of this weapon was equivalent to 2 or 3 years of income. The elven blacksmith called all his apprentices over, then began to hammer and prepare, taking out pieces of refined steel ingots that were about 10 centimeters long. Soren had nothing to do. He watched for a while, then went back to the hotel to rest. He was very tired today and needed to recover his spirit. He had already drawn the model of the curved sword for the elven blacksmith. It was a heavy-duty curved sword, and its slashing and piercing abilities were first class, similar to the style of the drows. On the second floor of the hotel, the elven proprietress thoughtfully prepared dinner for him and brought him a basin of hot water for him to soak his feet. Of course, she would not serve Soren so well for no reason. The main reason was the kindler that he threw out. After becoming an adventurer, Soren did not care much about the kindler, but for ordinary people, it was a few days' income. The elven proprietress, who was somewhat beautiful but not very beautiful, made a bed for Soren and brought him a new blanket. After making sure that Soren did not have any other requests, she left with a smile on her face. If she served such a generous guest well, he might not even need to give her change at the checkout. That was still several silver dirhams. Adventurers worked with their lives on the line, so they were more generous with their expenses. Before leaving, the lady boss even asked Soren if he needed any other services, but she was immediately rejected by Soren. Elves were not all elegant and noble. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked as well. The elven gods were famous for doing as they pleased. The overly long lifespan of the elven race also determined that many elven couples would gradually lose their sense of novelty. At the very least, humans were still bound by traditional moral rules. Some places were even marked with red moles that represented chastity. The elves, on the other hand, were much less restrained. Some of their hardcore challenges even left Soren speechless. This was especially true for Droll from the chaotic neutral and neutral evil faction. While there was a group of respectable and devout Droll, there was another group of extremely depraved people who wouldn't even spare wild beasts. If you met that kind of person, you would definitely want to kill him to leave some clean air in the world. The elves were also more particular about their special services. They were not like humans who used coercion and bribery. Sometimes, it even felt like a tryst. The waitresses in the tavern were really waitresses, but the ones who provided the service were a different group of people. The elves were famous for being picky, and it was the same here. They would choose their guests carefully. If the guest was charming, handsome, and generous, the lady boss of the tavern would not mind having a tender moment with him. The elves valued their beliefs. As long as their beliefs were firm, their hearts would be pure. In their long lives, they valued pleasure very much. In Silvery Moon City, which had been rebuilt many times in the north, there was a masquerade ball hosted by a priest of the goddess of love. At the ball, one could meet many noble ladies and even a priest of the elven gods. In fact, many people knew what the ball would become in the end. Soren had attended a few times in the past. In order to investigate a serious matter, he even met the incarnation of the goddess of love. However, that was after the end of the time of troubles. For some reason, the goddess of love almost deviated to the chaotic evil faction. In the end, even if Soren and other top legendary professions interfered, she still deviated from the chaotic good faction to the chaotic neutral faction. Because of this, the priests, who originally worshipped the chaotic good faction of love, all changed to the chaotic neutral faction of love, which worshipped self-enjoyment and the pursuit of excitement to satisfy the emptiness of the soul. There was a legend that she fell into the hands of the Queen of Succubus during the time of troubles, and went through a miserable imprisonment. The Queen of Succubus. What good could come of falling into her hands? Hee. Soren lay comfortably on the bed and placed his weapon where he could easily reach it. Then, he closed his eyes. Although he was very tired, he could not fall asleep for a while. He was worried about Vivian's condition. He was very clear about the power of the children of God. When they fully unleashed their power, they were at the legendary level. Moreover, this divine power was not included in the original profession level. The divine power in Vivian's body had just awakened, and then she absorbed the divine power of another child of God. He did not know if she could fuse with it. After all, she was still too young. Her body had not even started to develop yet, and she was already like a baby dragon, unable to bear the power of an adult dragon. If you let a child exert the strength of an adult to carry 100 or 200 pounds, there would only be one result, and that was muscle strain and even bone damage. Now, Soren could only hope that Gloria had a way to suppress Vivian's power, so that her body could get some time to adapt. He still could not sleep. Soren opened his data page and checked his main attributes. Name, Soren race, half-elf attributes, strength 14, +2, dexterity 21, +1, constitution 20, intelligence 20, +1, wisdom 15, charm 16 alignment, lawful evil class, level 10 commoner/level 7 rogue, 015500/level 2 shadow dancer, 021500/level 5 wizard, 03650, grade 2, health points, 85136 experience points, 2075, slaughter exp, 300, class exp, unassigned, skill points, none attribute points, none legend level, 4 divinity, 3 status, normal basic skills, sneak 151, literacy 115, steal 35, pick lock 45. Snare 55, focus 15, negotiate 12, appraise 10, deception 5, intimidation 12, taunt 8, act 3, listen 12, evasion 75, parry 15, block 12, heal 27, search 15, detect 15, copy scroll 15, spellcraft 12, survival 11, use magic device 12, cooking 21 legendary skills, omnipotent hands, sealed, weakened, personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, reflex evasion, nimble movement, evade sight, dark vision, regeneration, beginner, profession abilities, shadow. Weave, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, master, combat skills, shadow strike, shadow leap, counterspell, sword form, heavy hack. How did I get 3 more legend points? Soren opened the battle record data with some surprise because his legend points increased by 3. Then he found the following line of data records: hunting ritual, legendary battle. At the end of September 1675, in the Elven Kingdom, the believers of Malor, the god of hunting, held a ritual to hunt the Son of Fear in order to regain the attention of their god. This legendary hunting ritual was interrupted by you. Their prey, the Son of Fear, profession level 16, was killed by you. Your existence will be known by more and more evil creatures. Legend level +3, so it really was a legendary hunting ritual. Soren looked at his other attributes. The number of abilities he had mastered had increased a lot. There was no such thing as too many abilities. The more abilities he had, the more powerful he would be. The increase in basic skills was not very obvious. Except for the skill points allocated by the profession level, the average increase in all skills was about 10 points. Soren had fought a lot until now, and he didn't know when he could reach the average of 100 points. In the legendary realm, it was best to increase all basic skills to more than 100 points. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a legendary realm, but a disability. When one's strength reached the legendary realm, they would basically be able to comprehend other things by analogy. There couldn't be any obvious shortcomings in basic skills. Omnipotent Hands was still in a sealed state. For some reason, Soren clearly felt that its passive effect was still there, but he couldn't use it actively. There must be a problem somewhere. If it was a temporary weakness, he should have recovered long ago. Soren judged that the biggest possibility was that he might have been permanently cursed or damaged by magic. Otherwise, his soul might have been damaged. Many attacks on the soul couldn't be healed naturally, and had to rely on some powerful divine spells to remove and recover. It should be impossible for him to have been hit by any magic. Spells like stun, energy drain, and shapeshift were too overbearing. There was no way he wouldn't be affected at all. Soren felt that if it wasn't a special curse, it should be a weakened state due to damage to his soul. If it's damage to my soul, then it's troublesome. He looked at his own data, then his eyes fell on the 3 divinity that he got from killing the Elven Ranger. He murmured, damage to my soul needs at least restoration to recover, and maybe even greater restoration. Where can I find a priest with a profession level of 15 and above? Priests of this level are all bishops. It's not easy to see them, let alone pay them to cast restoration. Cash was definitely not enough. If he could sell the gems, he should be able to get enough money to cast restoration, which should be about 300 to 500 Kindler coins. Greater restoration was out of the question. It was a level 9 divine spell. As long as one was still breathing, they could be revived to full health. Basically, it was very difficult to buy. Above that, resurrection could also repair damage to the soul, but one had to negotiate with the Grim Reaper to cast it. Otherwise, the soul couldn't return to the body, and the resurrected person would be in a vegetative state. Probably no legendary priest would be bored enough to pay such a high price to cast resurrection on a living person. The purpose was just to heal, right? In the end. Soren's eyes fell on the 3 divinity. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.